everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Regeneration, Culture and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee on Thursday, the 9th of June 2022. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Lauren Edwards to her first meeting of Scrutiny. I'm sure she'll enjoy being with her fellow scrutineers. I also would like to thank, make sure I get the name correct, Sam Beck-Farley, who's introducing the report on item 7. As Councillor Osborne is unable to get here until 7:15, I propose that we deal with the agenda items 1 to 5 as listed, and then take agenda items 7 and 8 before Councillor Osborne's members' item if necessary. Has everybody agreed to that? Thank you. I'm also aware that we have two other members who are also running slightly late, which is Councillor Clark and Councillor Lammas. Besides that, I'm going directly to the officer in terms of apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. We have one apology tonight from Councillor.
Thank you. On to item 2, record of the meeting. Is the record of the meeting held on the 22nd of March 2022 and the record of the joint member meeting of committee, joint meeting of committees held on 18th of May 22 correct? And can I sign them? Councillor Hubbard.
Thank you. It's actually item 769, second page, fourth paragraph in, subheading Strood Pier Pathway and Flood Defence Wall. Part of it, the problem with the minutes is the fact that the way that Councillor Chambers' report was on the last agenda, because it was Strood waterfront, and he therefore talked about two river walls and two different locations about 250 metres apart. Therefore, it doesn't really quite read correctly, so I'm not asking it to be corrected, but just to say, the second sentence, in relation to the flood defence wall, comment was requested on the fact that the wall should be needed to be repositioned. Well, I wasn't talking about the one in Canal Road, I was talking one about in Gunwolf. Not Gunwolf, it could be Gunwolf, I don't know. But the old Civic Centre site in Strood. So it's the fact that it's got mixed up. But the one thing I want to emphasise is the last line, that we did agree to have a site meeting, not just on Canal Road, but also on the Civic Centre, because we were talking about one was the floodgate, and the other one was about how do you get to the pier, which is all very important with the Strood River strategy. I have had an email inviting me to attend a site meeting. I'm going to reply to it in a few minutes, but just to point out that I do work. But if it can't be done during the day, in the evening, then I'll say Councillor Curry to cover. But if you're just not asking for correction of the minute, it's too complex to correct. It's just that if we can, that agreed to site visit, and I think it's going to happen anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to go to minute number 773 in relation to development and such like, and on the list of decisions at top of page 17, decision D refers to requested that the Assistant Director provide an update to Councillors Etheridge, Brown and Curry in concerns raised about potential development of greenfield sites. I've not seen anything yet, neither has Councillor Brown as far as I'm aware, so I just raised that one as an issue that's not been completed.
Thank you, Chairman. So that is in train, and indeed my Director and Management team discussed that this morning, so that information will be provided shortly, Chairman. Hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Any other notifications? In that case, then I'll sign off those minutes. Move on to item 3, urgent matters. I've not received any. Is anything to come from the floor? No, and therefore we move on to item 4, declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests and other significant interests. Are there any interests to be notified? Any declarations of whipping? No? Excellent. So we can go directly on to petitions. There is one petition referral this evening asking for the implementation of a speed calming measures in Edward Road, Raynham. Mrs Cooper is in attendance as the lead petitioner. Mr John Nichols, a resident of Edwin Road, is also attending and will address the meeting on behalf of Mrs Cooper. Mr Nichols, I believe you've already been advised that you have up to 5 minutes to address the committee. So I'm handing over directly to you now, Mr. Nichols.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for inviting us to present on behalf of the residents of Edwin Road in ME8. I'm John Nicholas. I have lived in Edwin Road since February last year. I'm joined today by Frances Cooper, who's the lead petitioner, and she has lived in Edwin Road for almost 30 years. Frances began the petition we are here to talk about this evening. Can I have a show of hands, please? Any of you have a pet cat or pet dog?
Your mic has gone off.
Okay, is that better? Do any of you have children or grandchildren? Okay, I imagine you know my next question. That is why we are trying to avoid, with our petition, which now has 66 Edwin Road resident signatures. I think I have about 5 minutes today, so I'll try and make this short and sweet and to the point. I did a quick check of the locations that you people represent in terms of the wards in Medway, and most of you don't represent Raynham, which is where Edwin Road is. So I'll just share a few statistics and observations. It's a long and fairly straight connection between the A2 in Raynham and Durham Road in Wigmore. It's a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, although frequently witness 40 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, and sometimes more. It runs parallel to Hoath Way. It's a cut-through for commuters, a means of avoiding the big Tesco roundabout, for those of you that know it. It facilitates a lot of school runs. In fact, Bryony School is on Edwin Road at the junction with Marshall Road. There's quite a lot of construction going on in Edwin Road at the moment, which requires lorries and delivery vans as well. It's on a bus route, and the peak times for this traffic, I would say, are between 7 and 9 in the morning and 3 and 7 in the evening. It's fair to say it's a busy residential road. The only traffic calming measures we have in place at present are parked cars. Unfortunately, a lot of people have lost wing mirrors as a result of leaving their cars on the road. I personally have witnessed several near misses, and I don't want my 7-year-old grandson to be next. Many have said it's only a matter of time. So a bit of background. A petition was launched in June 2003. Rosie Gunston was the overview and scrutiny coordinator for that position. Janice Bamber was councillor, I believe. Unfortunately, very little progress in nearly 20 years, although speed indicating device, a SID, has been used in Edwin Road recently. Unfortunately, it wasn't working as it should and is no longer in place. I have a question. I know you're supposed to be asking me questions, but I wonder, where is the data recorded for these SIDs and what is done with it? More recently, in December 2021, a cat was killed on Edwin Road and the driver failed to stop. Other animals have also been killed. Sophie McPherson began a separate petition on change.org, which, as at this morning, has 513 signatures. Councillor Barry Kemp was due to present this petition earlier this year. This was the article that appeared in one of the local papers relating to that incident. So what are we doing as residents, and what do we require from you? We recognise we can't reduce the amount of traffic, but our aim is quite simple: to reduce the speed of traffic and to change the behaviour of drivers using Edwin Road. We are here today to request your support for the Council to reinstate the SID as soon as possible, and this committee to reassess and reconsider if speed calming measures could help avoid more fatalities. These measures would complement what Edwin Road residents are doing with Kent Police Speedwatch initiative, which was suggested in a response we received in February, and that's itemised under 4.3.8 of your supporting documents. We now have 6 Speed Watch volunteers trained. My wife is one, my good friend here is another, and we will be the pilot for Medway, with further rollouts planned, hopefully, later this year. And we received advice from the police today that we're ready to go. Every member has been trained fully. We're ready to take part in that initiative. We hope we can count on your support. We really don't want to be here in 6 weeks, 6 months, or 6 years to report the tragic death of a child having been hit by a speeding car. Thank you very much for listening. We're happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you. Ruth, do you want to respond to this, or Michael?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Nicholas, for coming along and putting forward your concerns to us. The situation on Edwin Road, we know there have been concerns for many years along there. We know it carries around 2,500 vehicles per day. And when we did a survey pre-pandemic, we had some speed data that indicates that 85% of the vehicles travel at speeds up to just below 35 miles per hour there. So that is just under the enforcement threshold for that. In terms of when we intervene on the basis of road safety, and we prioritise our interventions based on road casualties. So in this particular case, the crash history on Edwin Road is low, and there are no serious crashes resulting in personal injuries. So obviously there are other locations in Medway that do have a significant number of crashes that require our intervention, and we have a programme that addresses that. Notwithstanding this, on Edwin Road, we've obviously refreshed the road markings there. We did install the speed indicator device. So this is designed to be moved around where the need arises. So it's usually in place for about a week, and that's probably all the battery can tolerate before it needs charging again. And we're always happy to place that wherever there are community concerns around speed. So it is perfectly feasible that can come back to Edwin Road at some point in the future. And it's actually quite a positive thing, and it does indicate to vehicles where their speeds are inappropriate. It does collect data. In terms of how, to answer your question, I would need to take advice from our engineers as to how we secure that data, because obviously we do move the SID around, so we would need to capture that data after every event, I think, but it is capable of capturing data, and if it goes back into Edwin Road, then we can look into to securing that data for our reference. So that's all the comments from me. Chairman, I would say it's very positive around the speed watch, and we're very pleased to see that on the verge of becoming up and running, and as officers we are happy to support where we can as part of that process. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that response. We're actually delighted that we're likely to be the pilot, so hopefully with a positive reaction to our initiative, we can hopefully get that rolled out to some of the other places that are suffering speeding traffic like we are.
Any member? Councillor Tranter.
Yeah, just a question first of all. Obviously, you didn't touch on it, Michael, but there are two aspects to this. One, of course, is road design, and the other one is enforcement. Could I just be updated on what the police have done in terms of enforcement on this road? Do we know the answer to that? Have there been speed traps set or anything of that sort? Or it may not be information that's available this evening, but I'm always curious to know how the police are responding. First of all, I've got a supplementary question in a minute. Do we know anything about that?
No, we don't. In terms of what the police have done in terms of their correspondence with residents on this one, no. We know there isn't a mobile speed camera site on Edwin Road, so there is no direct enforcement of the speed limit by the police on Edwin Road.
Chair, if I may come back. I have a great deal of sympathy with the petitioners in this case, I listened very carefully to Michael Edwards as well, because obviously they're the experts, and we have to you know, have our budgets used sensibly across all of Medway. And I often argue that the same idiot that drives too fast down Edwin Road is probably driven too fast down a lot of other roads as well. So, you know, and it goes right across Medway, and all councillors will have in our wards incidents of this going on. So we can't redesign every road in Medway. However, Edwin Road, I do agree, is exceptionally, it's a very pleasant road. It is you know, generously wide, and it's straight, and it's very long, and it's got drive fast written all the way down it. And so I really, really do hope that this petition is taken seriously, and that as this goes forward, that other steps can be considered in the future, because I'd also say with the 35 miles an hour, if that's the average, I think you said?
That's the 85th percentile speed,
85th
so you
percentile.
take off the top 15%
Right.
of speeds. The average speed is around 28 miles per hour.
Okay, so the average speed is 28. Therefore, there'll be some people going down there at 40 miles an hour, which will be terrifying, to be honest with you, without any shadow of doubt, and possibly faster. I don't know if that's right. So I think we need to listen very, very carefully, and I'm not proposing some dramatic action at the moment, but I really hope that we're going to monitor this and have incremental improvements as it goes forward. Thank you.
Councillor Lammers, followed by Councillor Turpin, followed by Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair. My question is really for Michael. What live traffic monitoring apparatus does Medway Council use to monitor the traffic in the whole of Medway?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we have traffic cameras placed in various locations around Medway. They are principally on our strategic network, so they are, you know, places like the A2, places, you know, in Chatham Town Centre. So we don't tend to have traffic camera coverage in the more suburban residential areas, such as Edwin Road. They are primarily focused on our core network.
And you mentioned that the interventions are prioritised based on data given by the police, fatalities. What volume does Medway Council collected data give to your considerations for traffic implementations of measures?
So just what weight do we give to it?
So you mentioned that Medway Council does have traffic monitoring in key routes. So my question was, it seems to be that the decision-making process in this circumstance and in other cases I'm aware of is always based on police data. So my question is, what weight does Medway collected data through the apparatus we have operating already? What weight does that have on your decision-making processes when it comes to traffic intervention?
In terms of interventions based on road safety and crash prevention, those cameras do not hold a significant amount of weight because they're used for monitoring traffic and traffic flows on the network rather than actually any particular fault or crash that may occur on that network.
So is it the case that no data is collected when it comes to speeding in the whole of Medway by Medway Council? It's purely reliant on Kent Police data?
Yes, that is correct. At the moment, we don't routinely obtain speed data unless it happens to be part of a concern that's expressed to us from residents or from ward members.
My final comment, Chair, would be clearly in this circumstance, these members of the public are aggrieved about the speeding on their road. I agree with Councillor Tranter that all of us have in our wards examples of key routes where they are straight and have speed now written on them. I am concerned that it only seems to be based on police fatality data given to us that decisions are made. And I do think there is a case to be made, particularly if Medway does continue to have an aspiration to become a city, that we actually up our game in terms of traffic monitoring so that decision-making can be based more intelligently so we can avoid fatalities as opposed to waiting for them to occur before we intervene. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Turpin.
Thanks for coming in and talking so well.
I've got some questions along fairly similar lines. I mean, I did find that the speed data you collected was 15% going over. Was it a 30-mile-an-hour limit for a start?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so, you know, so quite a lot of people breaking the law, but you're measuring it up to 35. So I thought it was 10%. I think I got a speeding ticket for that, for 35. But
Not in Edwin Road.
not in Edwin Road. So yeah, I mean, it's something that it, you know, 35 is it doesn't but as the petitioners say, you know, some people are going 40, 50 or above. So I'd be interested to see, you know, what the peak ones were, and you've got 15% that are going above the 35. You know, the fact that pets have been run over and killed is quite, you know, that's another indicator. So I'm wondering if you've got a toolbox, a rather more sophisticated toolbox, as Councillor Lambert has said, which looks at other data, because including people that have been hit but no bones broken or something like that, incidents where an ambulance may have been called out, so that we can build up a more comprehensive picture of that. And also, do you do some sort of triage system where you can go out and say, look, give the residents a summary of, like, this is what we note about your road. This is the, it's very straight, or you know, there's no obstacles, and that can be dangerous in itself. Or, you know, what you've got the latest scientific knowledge of what makes a road dangerous more than we have. But some sort of triage is to say what the risk aspects of it are as a score, rather than one as if you say you don't wait for somebody to be killed, but everything else about it indicates that that's what you do. Wait for something, that we don't react until someone's being killed. So this is what I think would be nice to have, because if you have a toolbox of options, so, you know, take the speed limit down to 20 or put in some speed humps. I know that's out of fashion, but, you know, and you've done some for me in my ward, which is gratefully received, so thank you very much. I know you've got some great ideas, and also there's a cost to each one, so I can understand you've got a limited budget. So with your triage, you could say, you know, the next step we would take would be this, and it would cost this much, and then that would feed perhaps into your pipeline of things to be done, so that you know, that things can move on in a proportionate way. So obviously it's not the most, according to you, it's not the most dangerous road in Medway. We all accept that, but there could be a very dangerous road which we can't do anything about because it's incredibly expensive to do anything about it. So it's going to sit there at the top of the list, and that can't be a blocker to other roads where you could do something for a lot less money, which would be very effective.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to come back on just a few points there. In terms of Edwin Road specifically, when we did that survey, again, it was pre-pandemic, we found that 2% of northbound traffic was recorded in excess of 40 miles per hour, and 4% of southbound traffic was recorded at or in excess of 40 miles an hour. So that gives you an idea of, you know, when you're looking at 2,500 vehicles per day, that gives you an idea for the sort of the numbers involved. In terms of the kind of strategic piece, really, the interventions, and it's the same with local authorities across the country, we base our interventions on road safety in terms of reducing killed and seriously injured on our network, and that is the tool that we use for prioritisation. But we completely accept that there is another side to it as well. There's a community concern side. We are in the process of revising our road safety action plan and our strategy, and that's a piece of work this year. So some of the comments you made are very valid, and thank you for that, and that's certainly something that we will take into consideration as we develop that action plan during the course of the year. So thank you.
Well, and also it does take advantage of the fact that you've got a whole load of residents that are very keen to do something. So it's not like, you know, I can imagine the one you did in my ward got a very mixed reception, you know, and and that's not your problem at all. And we did the right thing. We did the right thing about it. But you know, you've got a whole load of residents that are all on board on this as well.
Thank you. Just as a quick reminder, we've got Councillor Curry, followed by Councillor Hubbard, followed by Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief because most of the points have actually been covered by Councillor Turpin and Councillor Lammers. I mean, just picking up really on that, I think one of the problems I have is the wording that's used in the reports. If I just read out section 4.3.2, it says, our approach therefore is to tackle those locations with poorest safety records first. So in other words, you've got to have a poor record, which means there has to have been accidents. And then if we just flick back up, if members don't mind, up to the response on Chalk Pit Hill, paragraph 3.1, it says here, Medway, this does not mean we will wait for accidents before action is taken. But actually, that's what's implied by the responses, that we're waiting for accidents to happen. So I think it's probably the wording that's generating this conversation to a certain extent. And picking up on what was just been said about risk assessment. I mean, 2,500 cars, or how many cars going along at 40 miles an hour, and a proportion of those, that's a high-risk area. And it's clear that there must be some sort of risk assessment process which you're going through, triaging or whatever it is, in terms of saying, actually, this road is an accident waiting to happen, and we should be moving in more swiftly. I mean, I think that's where we're going with this, is how does that risk assessment happen? And perhaps a bit more detail on that process would be helpful to us. And in that respect, then, what measures can we take? Again, I think that was raised about, is it appropriate to put speed cameras in with the police, or is it appropriate to put our own cameras in and put a sign up saying this road has got cameras? And if I mean, I asked that question of Councillor Galvin at a previous meeting, and I got cameras really quickly in Pig Alley down in Luton. So obviously there are options available to us, which we could say, actually, we can just do some immediate action. And like that was just said, I think it's admirable to see the residents responding, and this pilot study is a really important piece of work, I think, as well as that. So thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hubbard.
Aside, some years ago now, there was a similar issue in my own ward in Station Road, and there had been 2 fatalities there on the corner of Station Road. And at the time, the statistics did not include the 2 deaths for some considerable time, about 2 years after the incident, because there was the coroner's inquest had to be held after the trial of the 2 speeding motorists, the one who killed the 2 women, an elderly mother and her daughter. And they were convicted. So it was about 2 years later, but at the time there was no statistics saying that road had any fatalities. And bizarrely, we had the equivalent to this meeting, we had a request for traffic calming in Station Road, Rainham, rather than Station Road, Strood. And Station Road, Rainham had no statistics at all, and traffic calming was going to be proposed. I'm sure Mrs. Carr will remember that was her husband requesting it. And I asked the sarcastic question, why one Station Road and not the other? Having said that, I'm trying to find out, is that still the case? You have to have gone through the coroner and any potential trial before the police will actually say, add it to the statistics, this is now a road that's had 2 fatalities on.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that is certainly the case, that the official police record can take some time to come through to us. But having said that, as soon as an incident unfortunately takes place, we are aware of it pretty much straight away, and we do our own investigation to start with. So we are aware of incidents that happen on the network very quickly, and therefore we can start to think about that in terms of our strategic response to that incident.
It's a shame you weren't in position when that happened, because I'm sure something would have been done a lot earlier. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, petitioners. I'm really happy to see that you're going to have a pilot. A resident in my area tried to get a pilot going on the A2, as it happens, at the Bowater roundabout, but there was no support from his neighbours on that. So perhaps if there's enough publicity with what you're doing, that maybe my resident can benefit from the experiences that you have. And if somebody needs to have some linkage with them, I'm happy to be the conduit. That's number one. Number two is I've got some of the busiest, fastest moving traffic roads in the borough. And years ago, and you're quite right, Councillor Bamber was, Janice Bamber was the portfolio holder at the time. And as I understand it, there were traffic surveys done. There was even a plan to implement some improvements. And I think there were 2 pedestrian crossings even factored into the strategy. And we were about to have them installed. And suddenly the money got spent somewhere else. Actually in a neighbouring ward, I believe. But I'm not going back on that piece of history. But what I would suggest to council officers is, if you're going to revisit the strategy, and I would be heartened to believe that there must be a way of evaluating the information that you already hold, or the information that you intend to get, and that's going to be consistent across the piece, fast-moving straight roads, that we have a plan and we use the types of roads and the concern of residents, legitimate concerns, to roll out a strategy with an associated action plan. And I do accept that all sorts of interventions do cost money, but it could be that some of them are not as expensive as others, but just as appropriate. And you're the expert, so I welcome the fact that you're working on the strategy. I would ask that you review some of the past information that's held within the council. And I think Richard would be a good signposting person for you, because he was around when a lot of that was done, as I was in a different role. So I would just make a plea for that to be revisited, because those roads haven't changed. The only thing that's changed, there's more traffic, and people are probably less patient now even than they were that some 10 years ago. And thank you again.
Thank you. Any other member? Councillor Williams.
Thanks so much, Chair. You said there's about 2,000 traffic movements a day. Is that too loud? 2,000 traffic movements a day. And I think you said there was 4% going west over 40 and 2% going the other way over 40. Yeah? Is that what you said?
Chair, so let me just, so we're looking at around 2,500 vehicles per day travelling on Edwin Road. The 85th percentile speeds are just below 35 miles per hour. At the time of our survey, 2% of northbound traffic was recorded at in excess of 40 miles per hour, and 4% of southbound traffic was recorded at or in excess of 40 miles per hour.
So that's 6%. We agree on that, yeah? So we assume there would be some between 35 and 40. You know, that could take up to, say, 10% over the speed limit, over 35, although the speed limit is 30. 10% of 2.5 is 250 people speeding down that road. It seems quite a busy road to me on them figures, just to point out.
Thank you. Any other member? So I have a quick question for the officers. In terms of the pilot that you're proposing and the speed watch that the residents are going to pick up, what can we do to supplement that? I mean, Councillor Curry sort of touched on it. I had a quick chat with one of the officers beside me before that in terms of what are the recommendations to get a speed camera along there, and or what can we do to request the police actually put a speed watch camera along that area? Is that something we can do?
In terms of a speed camera, we work with the Safety Camera Partnership, who oversee the implementation of cameras, and obviously Kent Police are part of that. Now that is at the moment primarily based on casualty record of the road. So it's very positive that the speed watch is up and running, and we're more than happy to liaise with the petitioners over that and get some feedback on how well that's doing and offer any support we can. But in terms of safety cameras, I think it probably, at the moment, it won't meet that criteria, as I say, because it is based on crashes and casualties.
Okay, I know the press are in here and I don't wish them to respond or print this, but I'm certainly aware in the past we've put a dummy speed camera up just to ensure that the speed limits are enhanced. That didn't have the same costs and things. Is that something we can do?
I would have to take that away, Chair, and have a investigate that principle, because it's not something I'm personally aware of the council having installed in the past or other local authorities having installed dummy cameras. But I will take that point away, if that's okay, Chair.
As there being no... Councillor Williams?
Sorry, Chair. Did you say you're going to work with the residents on the speed watch to get a feedback between both of you to see how it goes? Could they feed that back to the committee when you get some information, so it might help us to set up in our area? As Councillor Brown said, you know, some people weren't interested, residents, but if you see how this one goes, as I say, it's a pilot, isn't it? So if we could have feedback on it, I'd be much appreciated. Come back to the committee.
Thank you. There being no other member, I'm handing over to the Vice Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Mrs. Cooper and Mr. Nichols. And I have a degree of, sympathy for you, because I was a member for Rainham Central in 2003, and done a great deal of work there. We tried to get measures installed at the time, and we did get a speed indication device installed there as a temporary measure, and I've used wall funds to get slow signs painted on the road back then. So things haven't changed from then. There was a lot of speeding back then, and it's the speed that Mr. Edwards has mentioned there just seems a little bit lower than perhaps I thought it might have been. So I was seeing it much higher than that. But okay, so I'm happy to move recommendations as set out on page 32 at section 7. The committee request to note the petition responses and appropriate action set out in paragraph 3 of the report. And the committee is requested to consider the petition referral request set out in paragraph 4. And also the committee supplied data from the pilot scheme when it's available. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that agreed? Could you put your mic on?
Beg your pardon, Chair, but what about my request to re-examine the old data? Specifically, I asked about that. If officers could consider doing that to base the new strategy on, rather than recounting the beans, let's revisit the count.
I'm happy with that on the basis that that data is still viable. Right, so is that agreed? Thank you very much. And thank you once again to Mrs. Cooper and Mr. Nichols for coming before us this evening. Thank you. Now, since we've had the discussion on this petition, we've had 2 arrivals, one of Councillor Osborne and Councillor Clark, who I said would be late. And we also mentioned earlier that we readdressed the agenda for this evening. But as they are now both in situ, we'll go back to the original agenda and go to item 6, please. Councillor Osborne, you've brought this before us this evening, so you'll have the joy to introduce this members' item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and it's fantastic to be back on this committee. I was on this committee for many years, and it's always a pleasure to come back and see the good work that's being done. First of all, I want to thank you and the officers here for giving me time for this item, and all the work that's been going on in the background inviting our guests here this evening and the work that's been ongoing to put this report together. I appreciate that. And also thank you very much to Southern Water for coming as well. I know in the past, you probably won't remember because it was different individuals, but you've also visited us before in regards to floods on Capstan Road, which you gave us a very strong account of, and also other flooding that happened in my ward in Luton as well, which is an area. So thank you very much for coming tonight, and thank you for that too. I'm sure you're probably aware this is quite a contemporary issue at the moment, certainly around the country, and I did raise this for a number of reasons. It won't be unknown to many members here that the river features in our logo that we look at every single day, and it is an area of immense pride to many residents. Many residents work on the river, many residents live adjacent to the river, thousands of residents, and we have significant plans to expand residential accommodation next to river locations, and many of our key tourist locations, which bring in significant revenues into this council, are located next to the river, and some of our key redevelopment and regeneration sites that we're planning from Chatham Riverside to the docks to Strood and Rochester. These are all riverside locations, and we are very proud of our river and some of the history to it. So the river to us is part of our heritage, and it's something we celebrate. Clearly, this issue has been raised really. I'm conscious of the fact that many members here are aware that around the country, there has been an agenda where people have raised concern about outflows of sewage into the rivers. I don't want to go over or rehash, I'm happy to talk about the numbers, but actually what I'm looking to really do is have a constructive dialogue to see how we can get information out to the public, our residents and our businesses, and to ensure that there's a plan working with you so that we understand how we're going to rectify this situation over a medium to long-term period, because I appreciate that some of these measures are very expensive as well. So this is important. I raised this issue as well. Councillor Tranter will be aware, as well as many councillors who represent rivers. We have had a series of major flood events, and we are predicting over the next 10 to 20 years to have even more of these. And many of the sewage outflows occur when these major flood events occur. So this does impact our residents. Sewage is flowing into people's houses with major flood events. It's impacting our parks, and the Esplanade is a good example of that. So, and I think the reason why I raise this is because we also report on other pollution. So I always use the example of the air pollution reporting methods we have. So Kent Air, where we get regular updates on where pollution is, where the air monitoring is happening. We can feed that through to our businesses and our residents. They know that there's probably going to be an air quality problem. They can then factor that into any decision making that they're doing as businesses. And what I would like to see is perhaps some sort of similar mechanism where we can effectively forewarn residents that there might be a risk of this happening, so that businesses can be aware of, to their their businesses of their employees, residents can be aware that when they get a flood risk that there's potentially other issues as well. So it's really having that reporting mechanism, that formal mechanism. I won't lie, I would have liked to have seen more data this evening. I know there's an item on the members' agenda, which and there has been some dialogue with you, and hopefully tonight you can expand on some of the numbers. But actually, it's not really about moaning at you about the numbers. I think you've had enough of that. What I'm really looking to see is where you're going forward. Okay, it's really forward-looking now, and that's the reason why we've called you here. It's not to slap you in the face or anything like that, because that's not constructive, and I don't want to have that dialogue. Okay, so that's my first thing, is data transparency. Could there be? Can we get that data transparency from you to council officers so they can present that data to our residents and our businesses? And is there some way of doing that on a website like Kent Air, where we do air pollution, or something similar? The second one is, presumably there is now a programme of action over the next 10, 20, 30 years where you are going to seek to reduce outflows. Medway is the largest conurbation in the southeast by outside of London, some 280,000 residents. We are a growth area. We're going to see significant increase in population next to the river locations. So my question to you is, and I would say this, wouldn't I, as a Medway resident, but are we a priority? And if we're not a priority, given our historic links, given our commercial interests, given our ecosystems and our sensitive interests around nature reserves, maybe we should be. So again, it's just sort of trying to get an understanding of any time frames that you have there. And then lastly, what I was quite keen to get some dialogue from you is a commitment really to have that. Obviously, there's an item here. You said the data is going to be published. Maybe you can give us some commentary around some of that data tonight, around where we are heading and some of the numbers there, and a commitment from you that that is provided to members to scrutinise, because I appreciate all of us here would have noted that on the paper tonight. That, and I understand that's because it was 300 pages long, but I would probably like to have seen that because I can't scrutinise the details. But I understand, and I have sent correspondence to try and get that data as much as possible. So just a commitment that that data is published from you so that members here can look at that. And that is it, Mr. Chairman, so thank you very much.
Thank you. So we welcome Nick Mills, who's the Head of Storms Overflow Task Force, and David Murphy, Studies and Investigations Programme Manager. They're going to give us a very brief presentation, and then it'll be open to members.
Thank you very much for inviting us here, and I'll give a bit of an overview because I don't know how much, how informed everybody is of the situation nationally and internationally to some extent. So I'm Nick Mills. My objective as head of the task force is to build a plan, basically to significantly reduce the use of storm overflows. My colleague David, you've introduced already, but David looks after the strategic planning around our drainage and wastewater management systems, which is a new requirement. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, so thank you. One of the things I'm leading on at the moment is our drainage and wastewater management plans, which are new plans that will become statutory plans with the recent Environment Act in 2021, and I can give you a bit of an update on that this evening as well.
Thank you. So I thought I'd start right at the beginning. Storm overflows are part of a combined sewer system, which means they take rainwater and sewage. They've been designed, operated and permitted like that for many decades in the UK, but also abroad as well. Storm overflows, unfortunately, are an essential part of the current system design, and they're there to prevent flooding. We completely accept that customers and stakeholders find them completely unacceptable. We don't want them anymore either. They've served their purpose, but the world has moved on. We fully support the Environment Act amendment. We want to go faster, and we share the ambition to dramatically reduce. Hence, my role this is a full-time role with the team, with funding. So we'll come on to some of the questions. I'll answer some of it now, but I'm quite happy to elaborate. We believe the most efficient, cost-effective, and environmentally beneficial way to reduce the use of the storm overflows is to reduce or slow the flow of water that enters the sewer, the rainwater. And to do that, we've got to focus on roads, roofs, hard-standing areas that all drain, and we've got to do that in partnership. So your comments very much welcomed, and it's certainly what we're trying to establish elsewhere as well, because we don't have the powers or the direct control of some of that infrastructure, and some councils often do, along with lots of other people. David probably will give a good example of one of the catchments inside the Medway, Motley Hill, for example. In a 1 in 20 storm, 95% of the water in the sewer is rainwater. 63% of that comes from highways and 30% comes from roofs. And we can give you that sort of statistics for all the catchments. And that helps us identify where we're going to target those plans that we talked about. Our ambition is large. We want to try and reduce storm overflows by 80% by 2030. And to do that, we've established my team, the task force, my role, and is to build a plan, but also to demonstrate those principles with a number of large-scale pilots. There's 5 Pathfinder areas, 3 of those are in Kent, and 2 elsewhere on our catchment as well. We fully support what you're saying about open and transparency. We do have a website portal called Beach Boy. At the moment, it's dedicated to designated bathing water areas. So the outfalls that could impact a designated bathing water are published. At the moment, that's updated every 2 hours. Our plan is to expand that inland, so every outfall's on it. So what you're asking is our ambition. There's some IT challenges to that, but by 2024, we hope to have them up and running, and we could potentially accelerate that for this area. But we do have some challenges from an IT perspective, but that's what we've got to do. We'll do it. We have shared the data. It's, I would say, in an undigestible format right now. So what I've committed to I think the regulation team that sent out that data followed it to the letter of your request. I think we need to provide some summary for you. So that's what I'll commit to do after that. I can expand on some of that with questions later. I've got some high-level stats here. The other thing, in terms of what you've asked around continuing to collaborate, I think it would be a good idea if people are willing to come and see one of our sites, explain how it works in detail, stand next to a sewage treatment works. I think that's a fantastic opportunity, and anyone listening online as well, please contact us afterwards. We're trying to do an awful lot more of that, because I think as a sector, and I'm not just talking water industry, I'm talking Environment Agency and other regulators, we haven't talked enough about this subject. And I think a lot of the outrage that we've seen over the last 2 years has been, we haven't been talking about this subject. And I think it's a good thing we're talking about it. There's a lot of outrage out there, and there's people that are upset about it. But I think we need to play our part in explaining how things work and how we move forward. So that's probably me. David, did you want to wrap up with where we're at with the GWMPs?
Thank you, Nick. So I've been working over the last couple of years to develop the first drainage and wastewater management plan. This is a new plan that all water companies have been asked to produce by regulators. We've been working with over 75 organisations to develop these plans, including Medway Council and Kent County Council. So we've had a number of meetings with your officers as we've developed the DWMP. These drainage and wastewater management plans are new long-term plans. They look at the investment needs over the next 25 years to ensure that we have a resilient and sustainable drainage and wastewater system for the future that will support economic growth and the developments that the Council has mentioned this evening. So it's really important we understand the risks to our customers and the environment, and these plans help us to do just that. And as Nick has explained, in understanding the causes of risk, we've really identified that these storm overflows and a number of instances of customers' homes and businesses being flooded is really as a result of the amount of rainfall that is getting into the foul and combined sewer system. So we have two choices, really. We can either significantly increase the size of the sewer network. That means digging up roads, replacing sewers, enlarging them at great financial costs as well as carbon and environmental costs. Or we can try and tackle the problem at source by trying to remove or separate some of the rainwater that is getting into the foul systems, either putting it into surface water drainage systems that discharges back into the local rivers before it gets contaminated by sewage, or trying to really separate and attenuate that water, so slowing the flow in an urban environment. And one of the key messages from our drainage and wastewater management plan is really, if we want to find an affordable way forward for our customers, we need to think long-term and more sustainable. So can we link in with and work very closely with highways, local planning authorities, to really make sure that we're thinking about what our communities need to look like in the future with climate change and be part of that climate adaptation agenda. So by working together, we can find a good, sustainable, long-term solution to this. And that means, you know, greening cities, you know, many more trees, many more green areas that really help with the green lungs of cities to provide those green spaces for local people to walk their dogs, to really use to improve their mental health and well-being. So that's what we'd like to do, and we're very keen to work in partnership with Medway Council and others in doing that.
Thank you. Any member? There's a whole host of hands. I'm going to go to Councillor Brown first. Then Councillor Tranter, Councillor Curry, Councillor Lammers, Councillor Turpin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming tonight. It's really heartening to see that you are working on this. I really am keen on the greener cities. I think I bored people here about being at Floriade recently, because if you haven't been, it runs till October in Holland, and it really does talk about some quite cost-effective ways of managing the environment. But my question is very simple, and I think the Chair probably would have asked it if I didn't. have you been working with the IDBs on this? And thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. So Priscilla Hazelhurst was with Medway Council and has now gone over to the Medway Internal Drainage Board, but we have been working with both Priscilla in her previous role and in her current role. So yes, internal drainage boards are very much part of the team that need to work together to try and resolve some of these problems.
Councillor Lammers.
Thank you, Chair. Can I also thank you for coming and thank you for your report. I do think it's very heartening to see the work you're trying to do, and I commend you for your ambition to have zero pollutants by 2040. I just have two questions, if I may, Chair. The first one is, you indicated, Nick Mills, in your response you gave actually, that perhaps 2 years to revamp the Beachboy website is a bit too much of a long-term target. I would suggest you, if I may, that that be accelerated, because I do think a lot of the problem with this, particularly with the uproar, was a huge lack of public awareness and communication with the role that the current infrastructure system has. And that lends to my second question, Chair, which is the current sewerage side system standards. You mentioned that your ambition is to work with development partners and garden cities. Are you satisfied that the current standards that are either required by Medway Council or nationally for the sewage capacity that we have when we build new areas are sufficient and future-proofed? Because I'm very mindful that, you know, London sewerage system was built famously 10 times the maximum expected ever capacity, and of course it was exceeded. So what is your view on the regulations? Is that something we can do locally? And my first point was about speeding up the website and communication. Thank you.
So the website's in place. It is set up to expand. My challenges are really around how that is displayed, so we don't end up with a map that is uninterpretable. So it's more around the user interface. So it probably could go faster, and as I said, I'm happy to explore whether we pilot something first in the Medway and get some feedback from users in this area first. So you put me down for that one. In terms of your question about infrastructure and policy, I'll start, and I'm sure David will have something to say about this as well. One of the biggest changes is hard standing area. So believe it or not, there was a study done back in the 1960s, interstorm overflows. A committee was set up, and they were concerned about something called urban creep. So this is the expansion of hard standing area. And back then, they were worried about 50 square metres per property, although it wouldn't have been in those units. That now stands at 100 square metres. So we've doubled it. So that is a challenge. And in terms of policy, we do actually have some policies, but the challenge is enforcement. So a hard-standing area, 5 square metres or greater, should have planning permission between the house and the road. And I'm sure, well, talking to Max at Kent County Council, there's lots of examples of flooding that's been created by driveways effectively being built. So that's an area that I think we can collaborate on. And a lot of it is about awareness as well and communication. And if we can do something together on collective education and enforcement if required, I think that's something we should definitely consider. In terms of the infrastructure of new developments, we have literally in the last month issued something that we wouldn't normally do as a water company because we're not a statutory consultee on planning for new development. We have issued the things that we really want to see in new developments, and we've been talking to the local planning authorities about this. One of them is no surface water connection, so no new surface water connection to the foul sewer. And that's something I think really needs to be nationally enforced. And the challenge we've got there is the big developers often do that. It's the smaller developments, it's the small infills, it's the extension to the existing properties. They're the risk area. So that's probably what I want to say about that. David, do you want to add to that?
Yes, we know from our work that a lot of the problems relate to existing development. So retrofitting and dealing with the existing development is going to be a challenge. So we know the existing development's a problem. New development should not be. And we need to make sure that the regulations and the planning policies are sufficient to enable that to happen. There are some challenges with that because the building regulations at the moment only allow the the amount of water to be consumed to be 110 litres per person per day and not lower. So the more water that people and customers use, the more go into the sewer system. So if we want to think about capacity for new development in the longer term, we need to control the amount of water that goes into the wastewater system. But if we can keep the rainwater out, we can keep more wastewater in. So I think it's really important to tackle the problem of rainwater being in foul and combined sewers. And that's why we really want to have this dialogue and new approach by working with other organisations to try and tackle that problem of rainwater. And that will enable the new development that is necessary to support economic growth to actually occur with the infrastructure that we have in place.
That's just spawned a thought. One of the possibilities is does new development fund retrofitting in existing? That's something that we should explore nationally. So support with that. Criticism, challenge, absolutely welcome, but if that's something we could support nationally, that would be good. Thank you.
Councillor Tranter.
Thank you, Chair. I find it fascinating and I'm learning a lot, so we're all on a learning curve with this, so thank you for coming along. I'd like to try and help the understanding a bit more. This 95% of rainwater obviously means 5% of it's not. That's presumably the raw sewage problem. I don't think any of us are worried about rainwater going into the rivers. But can you, I'm going to give a few questions, so if you take them all and then you can combine them together, it might be the easiest way. I'd like just to understand how much raw sewage, can you quantify that, is actually going into our local river? Because although the rainwater, I understand, it creates the problem, it's actually the sewage is the bit that we're clearly worried about. That's the first question. Secondly, Councillor Osborne quite rightly mentioned, it's something that worries me in my ward because parts of the ward do flood, and I say planned to flood. I mean, it is partly a floodplain. The Esplanade is expected to flood from time to time, but I'd like to understand if you could give any information on what is the actual risk to the public of a flood there, and if there was this. Presumably it depends on tides and a whole bunch of different things and, things coming together at the wrong time. But I'd just like to quantify the risk to the public, any part of Medway, not just obviously my ward, any part of Medway. So that's sort of connected with the first question as well. Then if you talk about new developments as well, and of course we're all aware that more and more they're going to they're not going to be adding rainwater so much with the bigger developments, but presumably that means the concentration of because there will be a lot of new developments, the concentration of raw sewage is going to go up quite a bit. So that 95%, might be a completely different figure in a few years' time as more and more developments come along. So I just kind of want to understand that. And of course, then if the rainwater is not going into the sewage system, which obviously is a good thing, where does it go? Well, some of it can go into soakaways and so on. But I'm curious. I dealt with a case in my ward of a developer. We had a lot of problem getting some land adopted because some rainwater was going straight into the river. And Peel Ports, who are great friends of this council, charged £1,000 a year for that rainwater to go into the river. I've no idea why they need to charge a penny, to be honest with you. But of course, I don't think the rainwater was harming the river or actually filling the river up, to the best of my knowledge. So therefore, I don't understand that. But surely things such as that are, people charging money, such as Peel, to discharge water is going to put developers off, and that's going in the wrong direction in terms of, trying to help you. So I'd be interested in your unbiased view on that particular policy and what can be done about that. Thank you.
I'll make a start and we'll make sure we answer all those. So 95%. That's the ratio of rainwater during what we calculate and model as a 1 in 20 storm, which, believe it or not, happen more frequently than that. It's a silly way of doing it. We started reporting it more in what the Met Office use in terms of millimetres per hour intensity. But dry weather flows are quite acceptable. So if we've got a concentrated sewage, in fact, the sewage treatment works likes that. The more dilute that you have the sewage, the harder, because if you do come along, we'll see it, but sewage treatment is basically a biological process. We harness bacteria, feed them with oxygen and sewage, and they eat away at the contaminants. The more dilute that is, the quicker those solids and other things move through the process, so it's better for us to be concentrated from our purpose. And also, we're not pumping tons of water around the network at great cost and carbon as well. So that's actually how we prefer it. There's also less variability as well. The other points are around...
Would you like me to pick up?
Go on then, you fill in the gaps and then I'll contribute. Thank you.
Okay, so if I could pick up on the risk to the public of flooding. So it's a really complicated picture. Flooding occurs from many sources, if you like. So rain falling on the land, obviously it runs off the land, finds its nearest way to either a drain or a river. Obviously then the river can take on more water than it can carry within the river channel itself and spill out into the floodplain. So you end up with multiple forms of flooding. Flooding directly on the surface, so surface water flooding, a responsibility that Medway Council has. River flooding is a responsibility of the Environment Agency. For what is termed ordinary watercourses, then local district councils have responsibility for that. And of course, we have responsibility where water comes out of sewers and causes flooding. So because of the complexities and the mixed picture here of responsibilities, ever since the Floods and Water Management Act in 2010, ourselves and Medway Council as a lead local flood authority and various other organisations, including the internal drainage boards, have been working together to really understand the various sources of flooding and make sure that there's a much clearer picture in terms of the risk to customers. The Environment Agency has been putting flood maps on the internet for some time, including areas at risk of surface water flooding. We, through the Drainage and Wastewater Management Plan, have started to publish more information about the risks of sewer flooding. We've still got some way to go on that, but the Drainage and Wastewater Management Plan will really help with being much more transparent about those areas that are at risk of sewer flooding. It enables us to really work much more closely with the lead local flood authorities and the Environment Agency to try and tackle those problems of flooding. But because of the complexities, I think there's no one organisation can fix it by themselves. And this is why we need to, through the planning that we're doing, align some of the future investment so that we work in partnership, we co-curate, co-deliver some of the solutions and possibly even co-fund them. And through that, we can find much more sustainable and affordable ways of tackling the flooding. Now, obviously, part of that will be making it much clearer to the public about the risks in their local area. And we do need to find a way to do that. There is information already, as I say, on the Environment Agency's website for surface water flooding areas. We need to find a way to put sewer flooding areas on that as well. The point about the rainwater going into the local river, I think really illustrates where we've got to in terms of some of the regulatory framework that we work in. It would appear to be quite ridiculous to stop rainwater going where it naturally used to go. So I think we're really keen to work with the government, the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs and the Environment Agency to find a new way of working, because otherwise it's creating a huge cost to not only our customers but to local taxpayers if we don't work together and find a better solution.
Welcome. Sorry, on that last point, I I will be a little bit more forthright than you. I think it's absolutely obscene that people charge money to discharge rainwater into a river which is there for that very purpose. That's why they are there. So how on earth Peel Ports can charge a developer money is completely counterproductive to what you're trying to achieve, which of course we support. And just to be clear on the floods, I understand what you're saying. Obviously my concern was about contamination. It's not so much rainwater, I mean that's also a problem, but I was worried about contamination. And hopefully, I mean we get very good, in fact I get the alerts on my phone if there's a flood predicted, and Environment Agency are very good at that. That's an excellent service, but it'd be good to know also if that perfect storm came together and there also was a risk of contamination. That would be an extra, great bonus to at least have, and then we can warn people if there is a risk or if there's not. That would be great. But I'm glad to hear that you're working on that. Thank you.
Councillor Curry.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for coming along this evening and for your report. I just want to touch on some of the things that you've already said in relation to working in partnership, which is really welcome. We've talked about how we need developers to be on board, the local council, we need to deal with the regulations because they're a problem. We mustn't be building on our green spaces, which unfortunately we've done here in Medway. And obviously overdevelopment is an issue as well, and how we cope with that. I have one question in relation to that, a specific question. When you talked about no new surface water connections, can you just expand on that point? And also, if you're not connecting to the new connections, where's the water going to go? Kind of thing. That's the sort of question. That's a very specific one. I'm going to move on to more sort of tricky stuff now. I mean, that's the welcome stuff, this approach. Your report says at the start, close to the start, that you're struggling to cope with heavy rain. I can't remember when we started naming storms, but it's been a long time since we've been naming these massive storms that have been coming through on a regular basis for decades, perhaps. And the fact that you're still struggling to cope, as a private company delivering a service, I find a little bit surprising that you're still struggling, because it's something that you should have had. According to your report, your storm overflow task force only set up in November last year. So that's a bit unusual. Why wasn't it set up 10 years ago? Because it was there and it was happening. And you've got a management plan which you're still producing, which we're still hoping to see at some point. It'd be great to see what that management, but you don't have a management plan, and I'd like to know why you haven't got one now. Why wasn't it produced years ago? Because this has been a problem that we've had for a long time. And also the data that we were hoping to see tonight, the operational sites, River Medway, and the wastewater releases, River Medway, that sort of data. You said it was not ready for presentation to us tonight, and I'm a bit concerned as to why that's the case, because this has been on the agenda for a while. We would have loved to have seen that data so we could perhaps give the correct scrutiny that we want to. So I'm concerned about that. So there's a few questions there. And then finally, if I may, Chair, it would be great to have that data as soon as possible, as Councillor Osborne asked for. A site visit would be brilliant. I'd love to come and have a look around and see what you're up to. And also, then I'd like to know some information about how much you are actually investing. And I'm talking about Medway, not about the country as a whole or the southeast. How much are you as a company are investing in Medway to sort out the problems that we've got here, to enable our customers, your customers and our residents to feel safe from flooding and to make sure the river isn't getting polluted, which it currently is. And also that cost will not be passed on to Medway residents, because they're already really struggling in this current situation we're in. The idea that the water bills are going to go up along with everything else would be horrible. So can we be reassured that our water bills are not going to go up here as a consequence of you having to do this investment? So those are my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, between David and I, we'll make sure we get through those. So where does the water go for a new development if there's no new surface water connection? Sustainable drainage. So sustainable drainage could be attenuation, natural ditches, swales built into the development, very common on developments, or infiltration to the ground. So that is the road and roof runoff. Permeable paving is a good example. Soakaways, I think many of you mentioned already, that's the sort of thing that we encourage, and there's plenty of examples of those. Plenty of examples of retrofitted sustainable drainage as well, some of them in very urban environments, White City in London being a really good example, which we're hoping to replicate. Next question was around why haven't we done this before? I'm happy to start that one, but I think it's important to remember how we're regulated, both from an environmental and a regulation, economic regulated point of view. So these overflows are permitted activities. The system has been designed to operate like this. David's got a strong environmental background. I'm sure he can expand on how they were permitted and how they were set up. But they are designed in such a way where we have to satisfy the conditions of that permit to be compliant. The court case, which you've all seen, was around us not meeting those permits. So those permits are in place. So if we choose to invest beyond meeting the requirements of that environmental permit, our financial regulator would say that we're inefficient, and we are compared against all of our competitors, well, not competitors, but our other water companies, to make sure that the price and the bill is fair. So that is probably one of the main reasons why going beyond the permitted activity is not being done historically. We now have an Environment Act change, an amendment, which will stipulate a maximum number of discharges per site. Consultation is out now. We will see the result of that in around September time. And that will make it law for us to meet new standards, which means that the economic regulator as well has to follow suit. So that these two things have to follow. Sometimes we do see disagreements between them. So this is a welcome change for us. Do you want to expand on that?
If I could just pick up on the management plans, and then and the question as to why now and not before. We're not starting from a blank piece of paper. We have been planning for investment in the future previously. We've used a planning process known as drainage area plans. They've been very much focused on modelling the hydraulic performance of a system and particularly looking at the existing known problem where our customers have been flooded from the sewer system. So our planning has been very much around trying to reduce the number of floods that our customers have experienced. But storm overflows, because they are permitted, haven't really featured heavily, but obviously customer opinion over the last couple of years has really changed that, and that's prompted the change through the Environment Act. And as Nick says, DEFRA will be setting out in September the standards that we're going to need to meet in the future. The challenge is going to be funding for that, because our customers pay their bill, and their bill funds the investments that we make. Now, our shareholders put additional funding in to extend the infrastructure that we have based on a future return for that additional investment. So that really helps us to go beyond where Ofwat will allow us to invest through customer bills. But I think there is still a real concern about the affordability of tackling storm overflows. And that is going to be subject to discussions with our regulator, Ofwat, as part of our business planning round, ready for the next investment period, which starts in 2025. In terms of our DWMP, the good news is that we are about to launch a public consultation on our drainage and wastewater management plan. We would love to hear your views of the investment needs that we've identified, and that includes the investment needs to tackle the storm overflows, not only in the Medway but across our operational region. It is a big sum, and that's why we're so concerned about the affordability of tackling this, particularly over the shorter term. You know, if we want to tackle things quickly, then it means probably digging up roads and putting in underground storage tanks to store the stormwater on the occasions that it would be needed. But those storm tanks are very effective locally, so we could tackle a storm overflow by putting in a very large underground storm tank. But that comes at great cost, financial cost, and carbon, embedded carbon, because the carbon within concrete and steel. And if the rain happens to fall elsewhere in the catchment, then that tank won't necessarily be very effective. So this is why we're looking much more holistic across the catchment to look at trying all the little bits that add up to a big impact. And that's the fundamental shift, I think, that drainage and wastewater management plans are bringing about. But as I say, consultation will start, a 12-week public consultation in the next few days, and we will let your officers know when that starts, so that hopefully we'll hear from you as part of that consultation.
And just to finish on that point, so that what David's talking about there is a traditional approach to tackling storm overflows, so grey infrastructure. Hopefully you heard and have understood what I'm trying to push for, which is that there is a more holistic, sustainable way, which should also be more affordable, add other benefits, including environmental, amenity and social, which gives us the ability to bring in other funds as well for the combined benefit with meeting multiple drivers. So that's where we think the affordability will be gained. The other thing we're looking at is being much fairer on the tariffs. So at the moment, we've got a very basic mechanism to charge for surface water. It's linked to the size of the water meter. It's not linked to the size of the roof area. For example, this place has got a huge roof. That's something we can change. So in terms of what will it mean to customers, we don't know yet. We haven't done all the maths. But I think if what we'd like to get to is a place where if a customer's doing the right thing and has disconnected their surface water, that they shouldn't pay any more if they're a small domestic customer. But if you're a large warehouse owner, then you probably will pay some more. We haven't done all of the maths on that yet, but that will be something we certainly will be talking to customers and industry and stakeholders about. Have we answered all your questions?
If I could just come back in. Thank you very much for your answers. Very clear and very, very concise. Just to pick up then, I mean, obviously making the point about the nature-based solutions and the engineered solutions. The more nature-based, the better. So that's great to hear, and hopefully that will be reflected in the management plan as it comes forward and we see what it says. Notwithstanding the fact that, I mean, one of the sort of guiding principles, whichever community you're talking about, sort of access to clean water and access to sort of proper drainage and safety from flooding, it's almost like a basic human right, and that's what we're talking about. That's why we're so strong on these issues, and we need to be much stronger in many respects. And just my last point, and something to reflect on for us, is that we are in the process of producing a river strategy, which you may well be aware of, so it'd be good to see how that connects up. Thank you, Chair.
And human health is why combined sewers were built. So Bazalgette built the sewers to protect the London population from cholera, which is wastewater contaminating water supply. So, and the philosophy back there was move it as far away as possible, as quickly as possible, which in hindsight has led to us where we are with the infrastructure we now have as legacy. So.
Councillor Turpin.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming in. I'm very impressed with you both. I've had mixed results from with flooding in my ward. So at times people have said, oh, Southern Water were the first out, they were out within 2 hours, and where were the council? And then at other times it's been very difficult to get hold of you in terms of raising a complaint and even getting someone to come out. And you know, I think there's a real, you know, it leaves a bad taste in the mouth of customers that have, you know, had their house flooded. When, you know, someone won't even go out and they get a standard response, and they find it very, very difficult. And some of them have had raw sewage floating everywhere, you know, so that needs to be treated as an emergency, because if it's getting to that point in someone's house, it's a crisis. And I think the idea of the wider strategy is great, but in my experience in my ward, there are certain houses which are through, and you can sometimes trace it back why it's happened. They've suddenly started flooding, and sometimes it's an infill development where the small developer has just said it's not my problem. They just shove it down, and then it just goes down an alleyway, and it ends up running down the street following gravity. And the guy at the end of the street, who happens to be slightly lower level, gets water coming in his front door, and it's never happened before. So it's a crisis for that person, and they won't even often claim on insurance, because that destroys the value of their house as well. So it's not an easy, and then they won't be able to get insurance in the future. So it's a really terrible problem for someone to have once their house is flooded. So I think that in already, I would hope and expect that new estates would be very well planned on this, but some of the problem we got is the old estates where people are doing, we were encouraging brownfield sites, building, and then a lot of people have built over their front drives. And I've tried to tackle this. It's very, very difficult to tackle that retrospectively. Even if you find them in the process of building the drive, it's quite difficult. The council's got only 1 or 2 enforcement officers, and they've got bigger fish to fry. So I think you probably need some political or PR oomph behind it, because you're going to struggle to get, you obviously have to work with local authorities, because half the time it's their issue and half the time it's yours. And B, you've got all these issues which you've mentioned, like how do you raise the correct amount, enough money to deal with this problem and raise that issue. So there's a political route that is needed, because there's danger coming down the line for your companies as well, with the bad publicity that you're getting on this issue and others. So there is an imperative for your company to act, but I think it needs a real massive effort to get over these hurdles of how to, people hate paying any extra, but where would be a key role is to perhaps, when a house is sold, maybe have some sort of a transaction on that where you do a water search and then for every house that's sold, the problems are few and far between, but they're very acute. But you're collecting a little bit of every transaction, and then you've got a pot of money in your companies which has to be spent on that. It's ring fence, so the shareholders can't get hold of it, etc., etc. So that would be one. And your idea about changing putting the onus on people to perhaps you get a little bit off your water bill if you can sort out your own fresh water problems. I've seen other ideas like from other water authorities that give people a water butt, which literally when the rain comes off the roof it goes into the water butt, so that gives a precious amount of time, because it's a flash flood that is often the problem. Everything's coming at once.
That's right. We don't have to remove the water. Slowing the flow or slowing that peak is just as effective. And water butts are great if they're empty when the storm arrives or the rainfall arrives. So we are trialling this summer some smart ones that empty themselves. So they know the rain's coming, they empty themselves, and they also make sure they're full when it's dry as well. So that's one of the solutions. It'd be worth us following up. You sounds like you've got a specific case. I'll pass it on to my operational colleagues after this.
Yeah,
we'll make sure we deal with that one.
Yeah.
But there's some really good ideas there, and we are talking to the international community as well as our colleagues across the UK on this, because they're tackling the same things.
Well, I was going to mention that actually, because in America, when you buy a house, you automatically you look up, you search the flood risk of that house.
Yeah.
So, and that's the other problem. If you give too much, increased transparency won't be welcomed by everybody, because it will affect people's house prices. So it's a political issue on that thing alone. It's all very well if your house is not in a flood risk area. You want all the transparency, but if you're unfortunately you've had a flood incident, a lot of people want to keep that quiet. So it's a really difficult political issue. That's why I think you probably needs some political heavyweight sort of action from the water authorities and with the government as well, to recognise the difficulties that we're in. Because we're living more intensely in our houses. People have got more bathrooms. More people are living at home for longer because of the housing issues, that they take longer to go and buy their own house. So there's all these pressures and others that we've already mentioned. So that's what I've got to say. I think you've got some great ideas, and I'd love to go on a visit as well if the other people are as well.
Thank you. Any other member?
Thank you. Just in relation to, I know you're going to provide some proper information to us, as you indicate in section 4.7. I'm just wondering if, for the purposes of this scrutiny meeting, you can give us a high-level understanding of the wastewater releases that we've seen in Medway. I think you give the period here of 2017 to 2020, and that you're going to provide some more details later, but can you give us an understanding of the kind of trends over that period, and also how Medway compares to other areas that you cover for that period in question as well? Because I think this will give us a much better understanding in this meeting of what kind of problem it is and how much of a growing problem it is. And I would also be interested to know if you could provide any information about the trends we've seen since 2020 as well.
Sure. So I will provide that summary. But I can give you some high-level stats now. I've honed in on 2021. One thing that's worth mentioning as well is the monitors that sit on the overflows have increased in population. So the data the data from about 2020 onwards has got almost full coverage. Before that date, not every overflow has got a monitor on it, and that's a nationwide picture. But I'll give you a very high-level summary, and this is for the entire River Medway catchment, including its tributaries, so it's not just your area. So in 2021, 121 storm overflows activated and released into a tributary or the Medway, and they did that on 1,663 times. And that's using the EA's counting method, and I'll just explain that quickly. It's called a 12-24 method, and it's a way of normalizing, particularly if you have an outfall that might go on, off, rather than counting lots of little, it chunks them together. So lots of little ones within a 12-hour period is counted as one, and if you've got something that runs over a long time, potentially days, they chop them up. So that's one of the things I wanted to get right before I came back to you guys, because I felt that it would be better to report it so it aligns with what you might see from the EA if you ask them the same question. So there's a number of outfalls which I've ranked. So the worst performing outfall is actually Tunbridge Wells South from the treatment works, followed by one in Gillingham, which is quite a small one, but it's activated 56 times in 2021. So this is the sort of example of the data and the summary I'll give you, as opposed to every single incident line. I'll provide that, but I think it's more helpful to provide you a summary of those. And in terms of how it compares, David does have some maps, but it might be worth you just explaining those verbally.
Thank you, Nick. If I could just explain, so as part of the Drainage and Wastewater Management Plan, we've looked at the risks across our whole operating area, across our 381 wastewater systems that we operate across the region. 77 of those wastewater systems are in the Medway River Basin catchment, so it gives you a flavour of how many wastewater systems we have. On our website, you'll find a number of maps. Obviously, I can pass this around if that's helpful, but this map shows our risk assessment of storm overflows for each of those 381 wastewater systems, using a scoring method that has been set out by our regulators. So we can see, obviously, how Medway then compares with other parts of the area. In terms of the Medway River Basin, the three issues that we're most concerned about are the risk of pollution, the risk of storm overflows, and the risk of flooding. There is also an emerging risk within the Medway, and that's because of the internationally designated swale estuary, Medway and Swale Estuary. I think that is a bubbling up problem for the future, particularly in terms of the development proposals for the future. And the concern there is around nutrients, the nutrient loading into those internationally designated habitats. And there are a couple of key locations already, the Solent and Stodmarsh in Kent, where development is being challenged, I think, around the amount of additional nutrients that are going to be discharged into those internationally designated habitats. And I think that's a risk that is on your doorstep and for the future, particularly with the amount of development that you're proposing. So just watch out for that. But the maps for this and for nutrient neutrality, they're all on our website, southernwater.co.uk/DWMP, and that's our website where a lot of this information is already there, and we're going to be putting our final documents on there the next few days before we start the public consultation.
And the information I was talking about as well is already on the website, but it's not in a sortable form for you. So I will do that and also show you where the historic data is all, because it's all there already. What you've asked for is a more condensed version of the same thing. Okay.
One question for clarification. Just thank you for that data that you provided. Do you have any, or can you give any indication of what percentage of that, of those outflows were wastewater versus rainwater?
Ooh, not easily. It's not something we obviously measure. It's something we can model. Let me take away that. Think about that one. Yeah.
That'd be helpful. Just be interesting to know whether Medway is sort of fitting that sort of typical description that you gave earlier of, 5% is wastewater, or whether indeed it's different for releases into the River Medway.
It is part of our wider plan. So it is a question I have to answer anyway, but the question is, can I answer it earlier for you? I don't know. Let me think about it. I think what it will be effectively an environmental information request. So let me take that one away. Happy to have a go at that. But it will be something we answer this year anyway, because we have to for our planning. Okay.
Councillor Curry wants to come back. He will be the last speaker of this evening.
Thank you very much, Chair, for your indulgence. Very quickly, question for you gentlemen, but also one for the committee as well. You referred to, I think Councillor Tranter raised it, about the 95%. 5% is raw sewage, and the 95% is rainwater that's coming out through the system. Can we have, at some point, not immediately, some point, some indication of the pollutants that water contains from the runoff, and particularly from the urban areas? I think the tyre waste, the stuff that goes into the normal suds and stuff like that, but there is obviously a quantity of pollutants in that water. It'd be nice to know what's in that and what's being done to sort of mitigate that.
Well, there is guidance. So a new road, particularly a motorway, would have to have a design for that. So you can't put that straight to the environment. That needs to go through something.
No, I appreciate that. But it's more sort of from the urban streets and stuff like that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, sure.
And then the other question more widely, I picked up the point you said about the impact on the Ramsar sites and the SPAs on the estuary. I mean, those are our most important natural assets in Medway. It would be nice to have at some point the views of the RSPB, the Environment Agency, and you've written it down already. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and thank you for coming along this evening. A number of my questions I've got here have been semi-answered already. In terms of the outflow stations and their location, the maps will be very useful. I don't think many of us actually wrote down or picked up exactly where we could find those, so I'd appreciate if we could email that into our officers so that can be circulated. In terms of contact points, I, along with other councillors, have experienced extreme difficulties at times trying to contact Southern Water generally on various points. Medway Council has a magazine called Medway Matters that goes out every few months, and therefore we'd appreciate very much if your contact points, and specifically what those contact points are for, were available so we could actually publish them. It's been identified already in terms from other colleagues of nutrients and contaminants going into the river on outflow. So I'd like to know what aspect of aquatic life is indicated at risk because of this. So that would be an interesting point from my point of view. Leading on from that, as my colleague here has just mentioned about the important sites that we have, this is currently under a strategic environmental management scheme called SEMS. And although you've already mentioned meeting up with Priscilla from the IDB, I mean, she's still responsible for that. I'd also like you to contact our lead officer, which is Dave Harris, in terms of SEMS and making sure that that information is passed across so that everybody on the council is then fully aware of that. Besides that, I think that's about everything else I've got written here covered. So I'd once again like to thank you and hand over to the Vice Chairman.
Okay, in which case, thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Councillor Osborne, for bringing this item to committee. And thank you, Nick and David, for your attendance tonight and answering the questions and supplying the information that you have. So there's a number of points, and forgive me if I've missed any, because I've got quite a few down here already. So first one is the offer of the site visit for members of the committee and perhaps other members of the council as well. So perhaps if you can communicate some potential dates and times through to our council officers. You also agreed about the feedback of the detail of the pilot scheme that you mentioned in Medway. If you can inform our officers of when the consultation will start. You made a lot of references to detail being on the website, but in particular, perhaps you can supply the sort of actual links or information of where the maps of the wastewater release points are and the various other parts requested by Councillor Edwards in terms of the release information. Also, at 4.7 of the report, you mentioned supplying the wastewater release data. So if you can be forthcoming with that. Information of the pollutants for the 5%, which requested by Councillor Curry. If you can be more specific on that and supply it to our officers. Make contact points or information available for us to potentially use in Medway Matters magazines on our council websites, and again through our council officers make contact with Dave Harris, our head of planning, regarding SEMS. And I think that is it.
Is that agreed? Excellent. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your attendance and the information you've given us this evening. Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 7, and this is going to be introduced by Samantha. Can I just remind members this is quite a large report, and any questions they have, please quote the page number and also the paragraph if possible, and also to remember that any area that is greyed out is not for this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The report summarises performance of the council plan measures that fall under the remit of this committee for Q4 21-22. There are 8 council plan measures which fall under the remit of this committee, and these are presented in appendices 1 and 2. 3 measures fall under the priority of place, and 5 measures fall under the priority of growth. We're reporting on 6 of the 8 measures this quarter, and this is due to 1 measure being data only, the GVA per job, and 1 measure which is an annual measurement and therefore not available quarterly, which is the average journey time along 5 routes across Medway. 5 out of the 6 measures we are reporting on have met or exceeded their targets. The 1 measure that did not achieve, which is the satisfaction with refuse collection citizens panel results, is reporting very slightly below the target of 85% at 84%. However, it is to be noted this has been achieving consistently until this quarter. This report also presents the Q4 21-22 review of the strategic risks. This is in Appendix 3. And 3 risks fall under the remit of this committee: SR17, Delivery and Regeneration, SR47, Climate Change, and SR50, Delivering 170 million Housing Infrastructure Fund programme. There are no changes to the current risk scores for these risks in this quarter. A further 7 risks relate to all services and committees. Cabinet reviewed the Q4 performance and risks on the 10th of May, and you may recall at the last committee meeting when you reviewed the Q3 report, there was a discussion that asked for the risks to be given greater prominence in future performance monitoring reports. We've also had further requests from Business Support Overview and Scrutiny Committee to make reports more concise. We're currently taking feedback and working on the reformatting of these reports. However, for Q4 21-22, you will find that they've been presented in the current format. This is due to time and to the fact that we didn't want to change the format in the last quarter of this year. However, we will aim to have the new report in place for Q1 of the reporting year. I'm happy to take questions on this report, as are my colleagues who are here to represent the services we're reporting on. Thank you.
Any member? Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the report. It's most appreciated, and the fact that it's going to be reformatted is even more appreciated, so thank you for that. That was my first question, which has been answered, so that's fine. I would just draw attention to members on page 44 regarding the place targets and the amber on our waste satisfaction with refuse collection. I'm just concerned about that because something that Medway has always been proud of, apparently, all over the years about how well we're good on waste, and suddenly the Citizens Panel is now concerned about that. So it'd be interesting to hear what's behind this. There's a whole load of underlying data behind that, I suspect. And one of the concerns in particular that I have is the recycling rate, which I believe is below 50%. And not looking good compared to the rest of the southeast. So there's a question there, maybe that's where that unhappiness is coming from. People are much more aware of their responsibility for recycling, but obviously that's not happening, and maybe the citizens panel is reflecting something in there, possibly. That's my first question. The second question is in relation to climate change, page 56 of the report, and just a reflection really, if it's possible at the meeting, on how the fact that we cannot seem to be processing our local plan will affect our climate change action plan. Because the two are intimately linked, particularly in decarbonisation and the behaviour of developers and the role of developers in that. So I've got concerns there in that respect. And then just some clarification, if it's possible this evening, regarding housing numbers referred to on page 81. The target of 1,000 has been reached, but obviously that's jumping up to 1,500. And how confident are we that we can continue to maintain those targets? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Curry, for your questions. So just taking them in order. So in Sam's introduction, she had said that in terms of satisfaction with refuse collection, the target is 85%. Sam said we hit 84. It's actually 84.8. So these are real taskmasters, aren't they? The corporate performance guys. So 84.8% satisfaction against a target of 85%. Of course, we're not complacent, but I think members would probably say we were pretty much there, weren't we, in terms of 85% satisfaction target. I do think that's pretty high. Councillor Curry, as you said, we're all very proud of our waste collection that we provide here, one of the best in the country. You will have seen that from the previous quarter, I think we hit 88% in terms of that satisfaction figure. So I do think we are doing pretty well in terms of those results. You did speculate around whether that might be due to the recycling kind of issue. People are very keen on recycling. All of our residents are very keen on that. Our numbers aren't quite as high as we would like them to be. That's partly a reflection of the fact we have weekly waste collection. It's partly a kind of function of the system that we have in place, but we are absolutely committed to increasing that. So that was number one. Number two, local plan. And whether that's going to get in the way of our climate change action plan. No, it won't. So we'll continue on. You're obviously on the member board for climate change. We have a really ambitious action plan that we are striving to take forward. Yes, we do have some issues with the local plan currently. Not going to rehearse those for members. Members are very aware of the issues around that. Indeed, the leader was very clear in this very chamber about where we are with the local plan. But Councillor Curry, you're very aware of the commitment that we have to our climate change action plan, and we're absolutely determined to continue on with that. And then the third one was just around housing numbers. So there was a bit of a debate at the last committee around what the level of that target was. Target for last year, which we were reporting against when we achieved a green, that was debated with members last time out. That was because we were against that 1,000 homes a year target. The target for the forthcoming period is going to be around that sort of 1,500, 1,600 a year. I've got to say, members, to be clear and open and transparent with you, that will be a huge stretch for us. I would say that for the last 3 years, we have achieved record housing numbers in terms of completions. That's a horrible term, but new homes that have been brought forward over each of the last successive years. For this last year, the numbers are about to be published, but you'll see yet again another record that's been achieved. So that will be our highest number of homes that have been delivered in a single year in Medway Council's history. That will be last year. The year before, we hit around sort of just under 1,100. The year before that, we were just over 1,100. That was then the record in terms of Medway's history. So we are members, in terms of the approvals that are being granted, we are doing a great job. But we all know the issue around government targets that are being set for us. And I've got to say that 1,600 target that we will have for next year will be a huge stretch for us. That's it from me, Chairman. Thank you.
Come back, I can't resist it, I'm sorry, Chair. Bearing in mind our MP's question in the House of Commons the other day, I'm not sure record targets is what we're after, to be honest, but that's a political point, perhaps. Thank you, Chair.
I'm going to quickly respond not to that, but into your initial question. I'm certainly aware as a ward councillor, and I'm sure others here as well, of new developments in their area, of complaints from residents in terms of either dog waste bins or litter bins not being put in place. And it was to my horror that I discovered whilst I was on planning, unfortunately I was not still there, is that it's down to the developer to actually put these in place and maintain them until the site is actually being adopted by Medway Council. So all of you who are currently still on planning, make sure that when you discuss new developments and the implementation of them, that these things are brought to the fore and the developer is the person responsible for it. Thank you. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. If you're pleased to know, I'm just going to be ever so nice and constructive this evening. First of all, I mean, actually, I'd noticed the amber on the refuse collections. I just wanted to put, you know, I only hear good news from my residents on that particular service, if I'm honest with you. I mean, I'm sure there are problems because it's a huge service all over the place. And so many residents go out of their way to say that we're doing a great job. So I was a bit surprised. I think it was probably the way the data was gathered or something of that sort, but I hope it doesn't reflect on the team. I just want another, whilst I'm being really positive, I want to say credit, looking at place objectives again, credit to the teams that are making a lot of the places look absolutely fabulous. I've also got a lot of people comment about flowers and you know, the general appearance. Maybe again, I'm just, you know, lucky in that respect, I've no idea. But it's only fair that some of those things which Colette and others are working on have paid off. And I think a lot of people have noticed some improvements. On the, just a general comment, if I may, and I mean this in a positive way. When I read from page 57, the section on the cultural partnership and a new cultural strategy, which I'm personally very broadly happy with, I struggled with reading the words, because it is very, very difficult, as I did when we were dealing with the City of Culture bid and so on, very difficult to turn this into tangible things that the people of Medway can really get a grip on and understand what is going to be improved where and how. It's not to criticise anything that's going on here, because in some ways I realise it's a new strategy and it's going to be emerging. But please, please, can we have some very clear, tangible things that, you know, average people like us can understand and, you know, and can quantify and see exactly how the benefits are and where they're going to be delivered for Medway, because sometimes it all feels like it's floating in the air and I'm not quite sure exactly what all of it means. And, you know, I mean that kind of... And on, sorry, this is really just very quickly on the housing targets. I'm expecting to hear some good news very soon on that. So fingers crossed that there's going to be some easing on those targets in the very near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So a brief response, of course, Councillor Tranter is always positive, Chairman. So thank you for the comments about the waste collection and indeed the work that people are undertaking across the place of Medway. Just in terms of the cultural strategy, I think I would have a lot of sympathy with what you've said about some of the language that we use, but I would say the cultural strategy has been developed in consultation with the people of Medway. We held a fantastically successful open space event at the Corn Exchange in your ward. And we've had a lot of engagement across the place around that particular cultural strategy. Lots of support for it as well, but I agree with you. I think we should be focused on the tangibles. What are the specific things that we are going to achieve? And you talked about housing targets, and indeed there was a reference earlier to a question that was raised in the House earlier on this week. Let's wait and see, shall we? Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Clark, followed by Councillor Edwards, followed by Councillor Lammers, followed by Councillor Turpin, followed by Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Chair. Just very quickly, page 47, target NI 195A. We've got a very positive 97% improved street and environmental cleanliness, which is great to read, but goodness, I kind of struggle with how high that figure is. By way of illustration, the A229 as it comes into Medway, past the Halstead Retail Park, is the gateway to Medway. Many, many people are coming in. Since we've had our lovely KFC open there, the mess, the daily mess. Now, we've raised this time and again with Sarah, with enforcement, and we're told that, you know, we're engaging with KFC, things are happening. But almost every single day you come past there, and you think of the traffic movement there is, and the people being held responsible for that are the council. I hear it so many times. What are you doing? Now, we're very fortunate. We have a number of lovely residents who volunteer and they go up there and they do a great job, but you wouldn't know it if you saw it today, for instance, and things like that. So, you know, I don't know. Do we need a different... Is this just for urban streets? For our prime sites, for our larger sites, do we need a different measure that we can accurately say? Because if I read that, I would say, well, we haven't got a problem. But actually, daily, we do have a problem, particularly there. And I don't want to get into my ward, this ward, that ward, but we are the gateway, and that's the first thing people are seeing as they come in. So if we just had that, and just for an information one, on page 49, council plan projects delivering future high streets, is it possible that I can get details of what the St John Church improvements are? I don't need it in this meeting, but I'll be very keen to, for different reasons, the people that I know, to know a little bit about that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll respond on that. So obviously, as you say, that is one of the gateways into Medway, and actually one of the comments we get very often is you can see the join where you come in from Kent, and that Medway is actually doing in general a much better job. However, in saying that, I do take your point, and we will respond to that, particularly the area that you've noted. We do very regular surveys, and that's where this statistic comes from. And it is all sorts of areas, and we have different categories of road that we look at. You'd be very welcome to come out with us if you'd like to. We're more than happy to take members out to show how it happens, how that we do the assessment. But certainly I'm very happy to look at these high profile areas as well, to see what the issues are. So I would say to you and all members, please let us know if there are particular areas where you'd like us to look at. Then we're very happy to do that. In fact, it helps us out that we've got those eyes out there saying, do you know what, this is an issue, we've told you, and it's still an issue. Because somewhere where there is a fast food outlet, for example, there are particular problems for us. But, as you've said, more than happy to talk to the outlets, because they have got, you know, they've got a duty actually, and I won't name names, but there's some of them that actually have their litter pickers out there, and they do a fairly good job. Some that don't do as good a job, but we've got lots of tools in our armour where we can go out and deal with these things. So I will take your point and we will act on it. Thank you very much.
And Chairman, if I can, so Sunny will provide details separately on St John's Church proposals under Future High Streets Fund. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Just three questions. I think the first one might be because I'm a relatively new councillor, but I noticed that a lot of the metrics relate to sort of findings from the citizen panel. And I couldn't get it from the report. Just wondering if you could give some assurance that the citizens panel is appropriate in terms of giving a cross-section of Medway, in terms of areas, ages, races, all that kind of data would be really helpful. It also looked like maybe the sample size wasn't particularly large, maybe about 198 people or respondents, and I'm just conscious, I think we have about 270,000 residents in Medway, so just wondering if there's any scope or any work to maybe potentially increase the sample size of that citizens panel. And then a similar comment, I think, or reflection to Councillor Clark, in looking at some of the sort of street cleanliness data and that maybe not matching up with sort of my experience or things that are reported to me. You know, I think the litter inspections that are detailed on page 47, and the street cleaning checks by waste wardens, which are discussed on page 50. It's great that that kind of proactive spot checking is happening, but I'd really appreciate some detail on where in Medway that is happening. I was wondering if that could be something that is provided to the committee at some stage, because I do think it's really important that we get an understanding that you know, everywhere in Medway is sort of being checked for appropriate level of cleanliness.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your questions, Councillor Edwards. I think it's maybe a rite of passage for members as well. So the questions about citizens panel, members have asked us questions about that over the years. So perhaps if we put a briefing note out, we've done one previously, but just kind of setting out the citizens panel, the number of people that it involves. We've actually had a citizens panel at Medway Council for a number of years, I think from the very outset. Hazel, you'll correct me if I'm wrong there, but we set that up from the very outset of Medway Council. It is sometimes mystifying for us non-statisticians that we can have a relatively small number of people that can give a view that is somehow representative, but that's going to be for the statisticians, as I say. So perhaps if we put a note out to Councillor Edwards, happy if that goes as a briefing note to the whole of the committee, if that would be helpful. If that's all right, Sam will take that one forward. And then just, if I can, Chairman, just the point, the second one that Councillor Edwards raised about the kind of felt experience of litter. So Ruth and I discussed this quite a lot, that there's something about the monitoring regime and what that kind of tells us. But then there's that felt experience for people, which may not be representative, it may be anecdotal, but actually if that's the perception of people, then that's the thing that we need to address. So we do try and keep an eye on that. We've got a meeting coming up, Councillor Edwards, that's you, me and Ruth. So happy to go through that in further detail at that stage, if that's helpful, Chairman. Thank you very much, Councillor.
It'd be helpful to know if it's possible to get data about the spot checks that you do, and sort of how regularly they're done. You know, whether you're looking at covering, you know, most areas of Medway over a set period of time, that would be really helpful.
Councillor Amos.
Residents of Prince's Park will be aware that their local ward councillors are obsessed with more trees, more bins and more flowers. To that end, I'd like to pay tribute to Mary McAllister, who recently won an award from Medway Council. She lives in my ward and she is the leader of our local litter picking group. And I'll be delighted, Chair, on Saturday to deliver even more litter picking equipment as our army constantly expands. However, Mary wants assurances that the efforts of her group in Prince's Park does not mean that the council is emptying the bins less as a result or litter picking less as a result. And I too am surprised to see the statistics on page 47 as high as they are. So I would echo some of the sentiments of my council colleagues in terms of I'd very much welcome the opportunity to see how that data is gathered. But can we have some assurances for Mary, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Lamas, is not just the residents of Prince's Park that are aware of the obsession of the ward members for litter bins and flowers and trees. So the answer to your question is no, we are not reducing the kind of taking away of bins because of the efforts of your residents, so be very clear about that. And on the second point, yes, I think as Councillor Edwards has asked for some additional information about the kind of spot checks and where that takes place. I think if we wrap that up, Chairman, if that's okay with you, via the Vice Chairman, we'll issue a briefing note to the committee on that very issue. Thank you, Chair.
Can I thank the Council for those assurances? Thank you very much.
So we've got Councillor Tranter, followed by Councillor Brown, followed by Councillor Hubbard, followed by Councillor Osborne.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Sorry, it's very, very quickly on the litter one again. I'll be very quick again. It's something I've followed very, very closely in my ward. I don't just mean the town centre area, which enjoys a very high standard of cleaning, but the slightly more urban areas. I have gone out of my way sometimes to kind of note where litter and problems are, how quickly it's cleared up, strangely enough, and how quickly it reappears. And I think sometimes we forget that, you know, there is a lot of rubbish going on the ground. So I kind of commend how quickly it's picked up. But I think there's some good points being raised this evening, and I think we're generally doing quite well, but I'm just astonished at how quickly some areas that I've gone out of my way to observe very quickly get covered with litter again, almost like within a day or so, which is astonishing, especially if there are bins nearby. So I don't know if we're ever going to win this one, but thank you.
So thank you, Chairman. Agree the points. Actually, there is something for us about information and campaigns that we undertake as well. So keeping promoting those messages around pride in place. You will have seen that on some of our freighters and liveried vehicles. So we just need to keep on pushing the message, don't we? Pride in place. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I'm going to sort of be the killjoy over here. Councillor Tranter being positive, couldn't have it all positive. My comment is going to be about parks and open spaces. The remark on page 46 reads, these results are based on 136 users of parks and open spaces from the 198 respondents to question 4 of the Citizens Panel, given a margin of error of plus or 8.4%, meaning the change in satisfaction is not statistically significant. Well, I would suggest that a drop from 86.4% in quarter 3 to 81.6% in quarter 4 is significant. And I'll tell you why I think it's significant, because I think actually people are starting to use the parks in the period of this audit. And therefore, because of when it's been used, I actually think that we need to look at why there's dissatisfaction. And I would maybe add that when we do the measurements, and this is for the statisticians to think about, and maybe I should have a chat with Leslie about this, but I think you should take comments from councillors. I've got a huge green space in my area. We haven't had any events in it, but we've had lots of football in it. But the other thing is, we've had councillors trying to get the netball courts mended. Now, there must be pots of money, because I know one thing, this council is actually quite good under the draconian legislation that we work with to get in money. And I would thank officers for the bids that they make. But I agree with councillors who say it's all very well having the strategy, and whether it's easy to understand, Councillor Tranter, or not, I think it's very positive that we get to the stage where we actually say, we've got strategies, let's use them to deliver stuff on the ground. Now, we've got huge public health issues around obesity, lack of activity, and yet we've got unsafe places, because if you want to go out and look at that, and I'm sure Ruth probably has, people can't play on courts that are unsafe. Firstly, the surfaces aren't in position, and secondly, although there is a very good effort being made by people to keep the parks clear of litter, the big problem in my area is broken glass and dangerous things to be found there. So I would say that this is significant, this drop in satisfaction with the parks and open spaces. And in my area particularly, not being able to use the amenities provided and paid for by all of us is not a good thing, because it doesn't go along with some of the great strategies we've got here. So I would ask that maybe we think about how we look at the satisfaction, but not alone that, but include in our planning some of the requests, either jointly or singly, if they line up with a strategy that there's money attached to, that we use that inventively. And I know you're good at invention, Richard, so I would ask about that. the other thing is, I'm still confused about some of these actions. We get actions that we're reviewing, but some of them are in the past, some of them are in the future, and some of them are a little bit vague. So I welcome the fact that after, I don't know how many times, we've asked for a change in the way these reports are done. I've spent time with officers who are no longer with the council, admittedly, trying to design something that makes easy reading for members, understandable about what's in the plans and how long stuff is going to be before it comes to fruition, and really means something to us. It's very complex about how you measure whether a street is clean or not. There is a methodology which most members find a little bit strange. I personally can't see how you can say that a street is clean from 50 yards away, but seemingly you can do that. My request here would be to work a little bit on including, because the numbers are very low on the citizens panel compared to what it was when we set it up. People are being asked for their opinions every time they log onto a website, or this, that, and the other. So they're all fed up with giving feedback. But maybe we need to do something like automated feedback when people contact us and feed that in, because the numbers are too low here. And telling us that statistically stuff doesn't change enough. It doesn't. We need it to be more granular, because that way you can make better decisions with the very limited money that we've got. And that was my point tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Hazel, for your questions. So just in terms of satisfaction level with our parks, we're really proud of our green spaces. That is something that's shared by members across the council. We're certainly very proud of that from an officer perspective. Having 8 green flag accredited sites, and actually Dee and Councillor Curry was speaking about one of those green flag accredited sites just earlier on today. Having 8 stands us apart actually from any unitary authority across the southeast. It's phenomenal in terms of that achievement that we have. But we want all of our green spaces to be maintained to a really high standard so that they can be used by the people of Medway. And actually my Directorate Management team, we were discussing only this morning around use of green spaces, how that plays into obesity and wider determinants of health as well. So really, really important. We're not complacent at all in terms of how we're managing that estate. I have got to say again, so we are hitting 82% satisfaction. That's a pretty good score. Not complacent, want it to be as high as possible. I do think, Hazel, you've raised some questions that we might want to reflect on from a corporate performance team point of view. We do supplement some of the activity that we undertake in terms of that sort of rigorous monitoring and measuring by just a bit of mystery shopping sometimes just by having drop-in surveys in a specific location. So we might look to see if there might be some opportunities to supplement some of that information that we receive. And certainly I think Sam would be more than happy, Councillor Brown, if you want to pick up a conversation with Leslie. You did have a number of conversations with Anna-Marie, and indeed Sam has committed to that kind of review that we're undertaking around our performance reporting too. So hopefully that will assist with members with some of the queries that they've raised. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Brown.
Can I just come back briefly? But the other side of that, and the reason I was asking for members' requests for repairs or other interventions to be counted into that. Now, I'm not great at how you will do that, but I know that there are people in your team who could help with that. And I formally think then that this isn't political. It's members on any side of the House that make requests to have stuff mended that contributes to some of the key strategies.
Councillor Hubbard.
Yeah. Okay, not to prolong too much, but again, it's on page 47 and 49, the two things we're talking about, the street cleaning and refuse collection. My ward, of course, goes from bedsits down by the station to 5-bedroom mansions, the other side, and it depends where you are in the ward as what service you get. So if you live in the posh bit, like yourself, Chair, then your level of cleansing of the street is different, because you could just point to the streets, and it's throughout the Medway towns anyway, where you have high-density housing, especially terraced with on-street parking. The litter remains there seemingly all the time. And I'm quite sure that we need to, we're not talking about the performance of Medway North, but Medway North needs to up its game and actually tackle the areas that need to be tackled rather than going off and redoing Brompton Farm Road rather than Brompton Lane. Brompton Lane is going to be littered. And also the Medway North do have an issue in my ward because bin days on Friday. Oh, I had a great time on Friday, but I had to chase after the lorry. And there it comes around early for my rubbish in. Anyway, a lot of people are doing it, by the way. It's quite interesting. It was the fun bit of the Jubilee. Anyway, so it's the fact that the street cleaners put their stuff into black bags with the word in green, Medway North, and they're left by the litter bins. And because they arrive there after the bin collection's been around, people go, oh, they haven't been, they put them by there. And it's a Friday. And if Medway North haven't picked them up, we had them all weekend, and this bank holiday just gone, but the one earlier in May, we had stuff there blowing around the street until Tuesday, Wednesday. And I'd mentioned it the week before, some of that was glass as well. So they need to up their game regarding how they do collect their black bags, e.g. or the street cleansing, and just generally emphasised again we need to pick litter where there is litter rather than just go down the street that's got no real litter. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hubbard. I'll take those questions. So you've mentioned a couple of times in this committee around the black bags with Norse written on them. So what we're doing now is gradually changing them over to clear bags. So that will help the situation, I think. And I think that was something that you had asked for. It is going to take a little while because there was a big stock of the Black Norse bags, but we're gradually changing over, so you'll see them popping up on the streets. What I would say, as I said a little bit earlier, if there are particular areas, please let me know, and I will take this up with the waste team, and we will talk to Norse about it. And if it's a particular road, as you've said, that is continually being a problem, then we'll investigate that and find out what the issue is, because it may not be that it's not being cleaned regularly enough. It may be that we've got a problem down there where there could be a business that's fly tipping regularly, that kind of thing. As I said before, we've got lots of tools that we can use in frontline services where we can investigate and find the problems. So please do let me know and I'll act on it for you.
Councillor Turpin, please, and then Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. I would like to talk, I've got several points to make. Someone's mentioned the fast food restaurants, but actually I went on a rubbish picking expedition with KFC near me, and they told me it was the busiest KFC in the whole of the UK. So that's another statistic for you, Richard. I know you'll be very proud of that. But I was actually very impressed. We actually had to go quite far and wide, and we collected quite a lot of stuff. So it was. I think they do respond if the local authority engages with them, and it's how you engage. And I think we've done a good point on that one. I'd like us to take advantage of things which just happened. We've just had the Jubilee, and the street parties, I think, were a fantastic success. The Medway Council encouraged them, perhaps more than some other areas. There's not so much red tape. They dropped the fee. I'm just wondering, you know, that whether that could be, there could be something we could hang on to encourage street parties in a certain week of the year, perhaps, you know, when the mayor comes in or something like that, and just make it aware that this is the week to have a street party if you want to have one. And perhaps if a little bit of prime funding just to encourage that, maybe a couple of £100 if you organise a street party, your street organises a street party, you get a couple of £100, you can get in a few nibbles or a DJ or something like that, and that, considering what we spend on some of the local park events, which cost £35,000, I think that would be tremendous value for money. But even if you didn't put any money into it, if there was some encouragement, I think that would be child-friendly, if you want a child-friendly city, because people get memories from Jubilee parties. People still remember the one in 1977. They remember the one 10 years ago, and they're going to be remembering the one we had yesterday. Now, you don't have those sort of events every year, so I'm not sure if we can generate the enthusiasm next year, but it might be worth a try, because it's a really family-friendly thing to do. And it's a great way of getting to know your neighbours that perhaps you don't see for the rest of the year. So that's just a thought of something that can be done on a tremendous budget. I'd like to talk about, again, on the child-friendly city, if we can sort these, and the local plan, if we can sort the housing numbers out. I mean, that's maybe why the plan has derailed, and we're waiting. We're hoping, perhaps hopefully, we're putting pressure on or engaging behind the scenes, because we've got a lot of issues which make building all those homes extremely difficult. And I don't want to get into a position where we're building high-rise blocks of flats, because I don't think that's child-friendly either. It might be the quickest way to get large housing numbers, but it's not, you know, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have an underground, we don't have a great, tremendous bus service, and so I find that problematic. If we go, the higher the flats, the more problematic it is. And I think we should pause before we relaunch a bid to become a city again. And I just thought I'd mention that on the Regeneration programme, because we've just had another experience of the city programme. I just think that any judge could have spent 5 minutes on social media and found out that there's a lot of mixed feelings about it. And that could undermine any bids we have. So we've announced already that we're going to go for it again, but it's a little bit quick and precipitate to announce that. We could need to look at the feedback that we're going to get for a start. And there are advantages and disadvantages. For example, the last feedback said you need a city centre. You know, and that strikes that could be divisive in itself. So we chose Chatham. You know, and if you actually canvass people in Rainham or Strood or Rochester or you know, who soon to be another Medway town, and you might find they're not so keen on that idea. So we could be, you know, maybe it is not our destiny to be one big city with a big city centre. Maybe we can be 5 towns which are equal but different, and everyone's got a different aspect. You know, so Rainham is where you go. You've got a fantastic leisure facility coming up there. We've got Strood, it's fantastic for commuting. I don't know, Rochester, the heritage, Chatham, the dockyards, you know, all sorts of, everyone's different but equal, you know, and maybe there's something great about that we should not really go down the whole city route, which will blur that. So I think we need to talk to the people of Medway before we do that, go down that route again. We've got time to do it as well. So let's have a conversation about what's useful, because we've also got rural areas. So if someone in Grain was due to become a city dweller, if we'd have won that bid, so maybe they don't want to be a city dweller as well. So we've got something special here in the Medway towns, and maybe, you know, there are plenty and plenty of cities, but there's not that many places where, with such a number of reasonably equal sized towns, all so close together, all with a strong bond, and all with their distinct identities. And I don't know anyone in those towns that wants to lose their town identity as well. So that's just another thought. And I was annoyed with a bit of reporting, actually, because we come in for a bit of stick sometimes in the media, and there was a terrible report that called Chatham the slobbiest town in the UK. I don't know if you saw it. It was in the Daily Mirror. And that's based on the cycling figures. When I read through it, there was nothing to it, apart from the fight in the street by the Chatham bin men, and the fact that we come out very low on the Sustrans on the cycling. But there's a reason for the Sustrans, because we are a very hilly town, so anywhere that's flat is going to, cycling is going to be a lot easier. So it's very, very lazy reporting. Obviously, it would be great if we could get more cycling. It's going to be an uphill struggle. It's a bit...
Needs levelling up.
The levelling it up agenda, yes. So I cycle in, but I've got an electric bike, so I'm cheating. So it's a difficult nut to crack, but we are making progress in those sort of areas, and let's keep trying to do that. But we will never, let's face it, we're never going to be like Cambridge with bicycles. But it's all a good thing. I'll stop there anyway. I've got a few other things, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Turpin, as well. So there's no lazy journalism here, is there? So in Medway, you don't see lazy journalism. It will all be informed, of course. Thank you for that KFC stat. I'm not sure I'm going to be using that one necessarily. And thank you too for your comments that you made around child-friendly city and our ambitions there. Absolutely, that is going to be really important for us. Street parties, great suggestion. Ward Improvement Fund, I think that's a great idea. Maybe members might want to consider that as part of their work. City status, you have given a view about that previously, Councillor Turpin. And of course, we're going to be in the hands of members around what we would seek to do when there will be another opportunity to bid for city status. Members all know my views about city status and ambitions for Medway. I've always been very clear, though, that all of the greatest cities around the globe are built on a patchwork of individual communities, and we can still celebrate individual communities as well as stating an ambition to achieve city status. But actually, I'm in the hands of members, so members will tell me whether we do or don't go for it. I have also got to say, if the opportunity is there, why would we not go for it as well? So I'm in the hands of members around that in terms of how we would seek to take that forward in future. Thank you for your comments, though, Councillor Turpin. There's a lot of positive stuff in there. I do have an ambition for us to be a cycling city as well. That would be great, wouldn't it? Whether you're cheating or not with your electric bikes, I know not. But we certainly have an ambition to continue to encourage cycling. 80 miles of cycleways across Medway is a fantastic opportunity for us, isn't it? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hubbard, followed by Councillor Osborne, followed by Councillor Curry.
No, it's all right. You don't have to speak if you don't want to.
No, we'll go directly to Councillor Osborne then.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's good to follow Councillor Turpin on his chicken run with KFC. So or maybe one of many, I don't know, perhaps. We'll find out more in the next 12 months on that. Just on page 47, not to labour a point, so to speak, on litter. So I've recently done a bin audit in my ward with Medway North, and we discovered that a number of bins were missing. And I've kindly asked them to replace those bins in different locations. I'm wondering how widespread that situation is, what proportion of bins that are supposed to be in place are actually missing, because that is not only a contractual issue, it does raise questions about how reliable these stats are. If we can't even tell how many bins we've got because of a number of them are not there, then how can we really know that our stats on these figures are entirely accurate? So that's my first question on page 47. My next question is on page 71 on the GVA per job. I love a graph which is heading in the right direction. However, it doesn't include inflation. So I was just wondering if maybe we could do that in future, because including inflation, maybe some of these numbers going in the right direction don't mean quite as much. I just wondered if that's something which maybe could be included. So because numbers going up don't always indicate that people are earning more in relation to inflation. Page 84, in relation to the Medway Tunnel Improvement Programme, as Mr Hicks will know, Medway Tunnel is most often on my mind, so including right now, because it's closed apparently, so I can't get across to Strood. But I know that there's the capital element of this has been secured, but you will be aware that I'm mostly concerned about the revenue element, and that's something which is still a concern for me, and a concern actually for a routes budget primarily, and again, something that regularly crosses my mind, and I just wondered if there was an update around, just in terms of the next 10 years, have we got a plan around the Medway Tunnel, around future capital requirements over the medium to long term, and how sustainable that situation is, because clearly it is an asset that we need to maintain, and now it's under our ownership. That's something that's important. And have we made continued representation to the Department for Transport that perhaps they should consider taking it off our hands, because that would free up significant revenue sums to spend on actual roads, which I think would be a priority. And so that's my third question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. So the mystery of the missing bins, I'm sure that will be continue to be taken up with Norse in terms of sort of digging into that. So that will just be a work in progress. I wasn't cited on that, not aware of that as an issue, so we'll follow through on that. The GVA scores, so I love a graph as well. At the moment, that enables us to compare our GVA with the kind of national position and regional position. We can have a look and see whether inflation can be applied in that. It would need to be across those other metrics as well, though, if we're going to compare like with like. But we can certainly have a look at that, given the kind of where inflation's going at the moment. The predictions are, of course, that inflation is going to come down to about 4.6% next year. Obviously, we'll see about that. And Medway Tunnel, yes, that is a hardy perennial that you raised with us, Councillor Osborne. Lots of conversations with DFT around that position. I've got to say the tunnel team are great. So Matt in Ruth's team does a fantastic, phenomenal job of maintaining that asset, you're quite right, for Medway and indeed for our roads network more widely. So that continues to be an ongoing theme of discussion with the Department for Transport. Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Councillor Osborne.
Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair. And continuing the theme of litter, I mean, as the conversation was going on, and particularly when Councillor Lammerts mentioned the great work going on with volunteers in his ward, the Great British Spring Clean, I thought it's worth a mention. 3 tonnes of litter shifted, 53 events and over 300 volunteers. I think the environmental health team deserve our thanks and praise for organising that, because it's the best result they've ever had, as far as I'm aware. So just worth a mention on that one. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much, Councillor Curry. Yeah, we are, I mean, that's something that's going to continue, I would hope, and it just shows the community spirit, actually, but we're more than happy to continue arranging those events. Thank you very much.
I'd like to quickly add to that, thanks to all local ward councillors as well that participated in that as well. Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I'd like to go to page 101, just about a question about the HIF. As we know, we got £170 million for the HIF. If you go over budget on that, it says in here in the report, 1%, 1.7 million overspend will be funded by the council. I wonder if you could just give us an update on the budget and how we're going on that, because it's, you know, it's quite a frightening statistic. I just wonder how the budget is going on the HIF at the moment. Might be a question for Sonny, I should think.
Thank you. Yeah, as reported last time, we're still going through detailed design, so we're going through a number of stages of design. We're not at the end yet, so basically we're working within the £170 million envelope. There is no update on it.
You confident we will meet the target, 170 million for the job?
Well, I can't comment on confidence, but we're working towards that. It's very challenging, but yes, we are working within 170.
We can see the sweat on his brow. Councillor Carr.
I'm going to be very brief. Reading the report on enforcement action, it gives details of all the good things you've done, which is great. However, I'm finding it really difficult to get anybody to help me with a particularly urgent enforcement action or enforcement problem. So I'm always told the workload's too high and I don't know where to go from there.
Thank you, Chairman. So I am aware of that particular issue. That was escalated to the Chief Executive yesterday. It's found its way to my desk. So it's found its way to Dee's desk. So we will be coming back. So your colleague warden member raised this particular issue. So we will be coming back to you to follow that up. But I can give you apologies, members, for speaking in oblique terms, but my understanding is that structure is not dangerous, was the original thing that we've had, but we will be following up with you in terms of that. And I'm happy to take that offline, Chairman.
Do you want to come up?
I'm not sure we're talking about the same thing, actually, because it's quite a few structures I'm talking about.
That's fine, Chairman. Happy to have an initial conversation with Councillor Carr afterwards, but then my team will be following up. But on that, there was one particular building where it's fine. Thank you, Chairman.
Any other member? In that case, I'm going to go directly to the Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, there's quite a few points, so yeah, we'll see what we can do. Obviously, for Councillor Clark, Sonny agreed to provide a breakdown of the St John's Church funding. Ruth kindly offered any member visits to the inspections. Briefing note to be provided regarding the citizens panel. Another briefing note regarding the data on the street cleaning spot checks. Mr Hicks to look at the potentially adding the GVA to potentially add in the inflation. You agree to that, Richard? Excellent. Well, there you go, Sam. And the committee's thanks to the environmental team for the GB spring cleans. And Hazel, right, so I'm not quite sure how you want me to word this, Hazel, but I don't know, perhaps I can come to you for that part.
I think it's quite simple that we ask our colleagues to include members' requests for repairs to play equipment, green space, to the infrastructure stuff that's within green spaces and play areas, to be added into the action plan, and also to see if that can work within the satisfaction figures. And I'll leave the methodology to the experts.
Thank you. And if I can, Chairman, just to add to that, so it's exactly that. So suggestion from Councillor Brown was that we just take that, we incorporate that within the mix of those satisfaction scores, that we try and find some way of capturing that member feedback into the overall satisfaction score. Thank you, Chairman.
Is that agreed?
Well done.
Excellent. Thank you. Then we'll move on to the last agenda item, the work programme.
Thank you, Chairman. Just want to highlight a couple of things in the work programme report. You'll see it, paragraph 3.3, at the pre-agenda meeting, it was suggested the committee should receive a regular report on section 106, developer contributions, how that's been spent, and you've been asked to identify which meeting you would like that report to come to. And just another small thing to point out, Councillor Filmer had been originally scheduled to come to your August meeting to be held to account, but unfortunately can't make that, so just colleagues are working to identify a suitable date for that. Thank you.
Any member got any suggestions for 3.3?
Chairman, I appreciate you asking members for a view there, but given it's going to be officers that are going to be compiling the information ready, would it be acceptable for members if, so we'll be asking Dee and the planning team to pull together that information about section 106, that we bring that forward when that work is done. Happy that we kind of confirm that in the pre-agenda meetings, that yourself and the Vice Chairman and Councillor Curry attend, if that's acceptable for members.
That seems to be agreed. Fine. Leading on to the work programme that we've got for August and October, is there any comments there from any member? Councillor Lemmas.
Thank you, Chair. Just because I'm new to this committee, as you'll be aware, when do we scrutinise grass cutting and things like that? Does that come in the summer at the height of the cutting season? Is it seasonally allocated, or when do we get our teeth into grass?
Thank you, Chairman. Not sure if that's a mixed metaphor, Councillor Lemmas, but we can do our best. So as part of the performance reports, there are opportunities to talk about that. Sometimes there may be issues where there's a member's item to bring something forward, as Councillor Osborne has done this evening, or indeed for some of our contracts, there are kind of regular monitoring updates that we get. So recently had Volker Highways were here to the committee to kind of talk about those issues. Our arm's length organisations tend to be held to account at business support in terms of the overall position. There are the members who are on the business support committee will attest to that. But there's always that opportunity through performance reports. You will see we've had a pretty good thrash around of lots of different service areas this evening on a pretty unfettered basis. So there's the opportunity to go through those issues at that stage. Those are the process points, really, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The reason why I bring that up is because one thing I really want to look at, hopefully through this committee, is the relationship between the grass cutting that goes on with MHS homes and Medway Council-owned areas. Because I have this constant problem whereby you leave patches of grass and blah, 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 and people contact me and a week later someone turns up. You know, it's just a nightmare. And one thing I've spoken preliminary discussions, what I'd like the council to do is just take control of all the grass cutting. So I didn't know if there's an opportunity to arise naturally in the work programme to discuss that, or if I need to do an Osborne special and make a special request.
Thank you, Chairman. So can I suggest, why don't we do a briefing note, first of all, for members so it sets out the issues, because you are right, but not necessarily all members will experience that. There is a bit of a difference between what Norse does and then MHS got their own kind of delivery around their grass cutting. And, you know, why should members of the public need to know who's responsible for what? They just want the grass cut, don't they? So if we set out in a briefing note, first of all, that just kind of captures the position so that members are aware of that, then we can circulate that to the committee and then we can determine next steps from that, either through pre-agenda or through discussions with members. Is that all right, Chairman? Thank you, Councillor Lemmas.
Any other member? Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair. Just two issues that might be worth this committee having a look at. One that came up earlier in the meeting with Southern Water in relation to the impact of storms and flooding on the North Kent marshes because of the value of those, and maybe RSPB, Natural England and the Environment Agency. I don't know whether it's worth us having something along those lines so that we're aware of what issues we have to face there. And the second one was in relation to piers. Councillor Hubbard has already raised that. We've got a visit happening there in some form fairly shortly, and the Rochester one has just fallen into the Medway. So we've got an issue there that might be worth us having to look at more closely. And Kings North is another one that's been looked at as a very valuable asset for the council as well. So there's something around piers maybe worth us having a look at some point in the future as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. So can I suggest, because all of those would seem to be positive areas for debate and discussion, but perhaps if members will allow, we've got the pre-agenda meeting where we can kind of go through some of those issues and then we can talk about what the sort of likely cycling might be for that. Obviously, RSPB coming along, external guests, we've got to invite them, so you know, need to give them a reasonable opportunity to be able to make it. And then we can pick up the other issues. I did see Councillor Tranter was champing at the bit to jump in. I'm sure he's going to say something about river strategy, because that would be the strategic connection. But obviously I'll give way to Councillor Tranter, Chairman.
You read my mind. Yes, it's exactly how I think we should deal with it, would be through that process. Thank you.
Any other member? I have some concerns regarding the portfolio attending the October meeting. Members may recall last October when we had that portfolio holder before us, a number of statements were made in terms of documents that didn't exist, and questions were raised in terms of those documents, the consultants on that, and of course from Councillor Turpin, where were the missing homes allocated to. I've written to that portfolio holder. I've not received a reply. It's now 9 months since that meeting. In 2 months' time, what we're saying is potentially we're going to have that portfolio holder back in front of us again. And I don't think that's suitable, seeing there's still so much information outstanding. So somehow that information needs to go back to her, or through you, Richard, to the appropriate officers and things to say this is not acceptable.
Thank you, Chairman. One way of positively addressing this would be to ensure that so whenever portfolio holders are held to account, there's always a report that accompanies them. So clarity could be addressed and achieved through that report, picking up those issues that were raised. I'm not going to make a comment about the portfolio holders' responses to the committee, but certainly in terms of the report that's presented to this committee, that could reference those issues that were raised last time with clarity provided around the status of those documents, if that would help, Chairman.
Councillor Turpin.
Just for information, I did put an FOI in for those documents, and that was refused. And then I appealed it, and the appeal's been refused as well. So that should be going on its way to the Information Commissioner.
Any other member? In that case, over to the Vice Chairman.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Happy to move recommendations on page 149 at section 7, noting the comments of Director and Michael, and we'll take those points that you raised, Councillor Curry, to pre-agenda. You did promise a briefing note for Councillor Lamas, well, for all members regarding the grass cutting. Thank you.
Great. Is that agreed? In that case, it's the end of tonight's meeting, and I thank you all for your attendance and your questions and your participation. Thank you very much.